John Mercer carried the fourth chair out of the kitchen and set it down in the dark of the barn because he could not stomach one more supper across from an empty place. His wife had been in the ground 11 months. The house had learned to hold its breath. Then a wagon came up the road, carrying a woman he'd hired to cook and clean for his boys, and nothing more than that. He told himself so. He'd spend the whole long summer telling himself so. If you're watching, subscribe and stay with this story clear to the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The wagon came up the Mercer Road at the hottest hour of the day, and John Mercer did not walk out to meet it. He stood at the corner of the barn with a curry brush in his hand and watched it come, and he told himself he was busy. The mare didn't need brushing. He'd brushed her that morning. But a man had to be doing something with his hands when a stranger arrived to take up residence in a house that had gone quiet as a grave, and John Mercer had run clean out of other things to hold. "That her?" Noah asked. The boy had come up beside him without a sound, the way he'd learned to move in the last year, and John felt him there before he heard him. "That's her. You gonna go say hello?" "I'll say what needs saying." Noah didn't answer that. At 11, the boy had a way of going still that unsettled his father more than any tantrum could have. Martha used to say Noah felt things the way a barometer felt weather long before anybody else could see the storm. She'd said it like it was a gift. John had come to think of it more as a burden the boy had been handed too early. The wagon rolled to a stop in the yard. The driver, a hired man out of Larkspur named Pell, set the brake and climbed down and went around to help the woman with her trunk. And John made himself walk forward, then because a man didn't make a woman haul her own trunk, while he watched from the shade like some lord of the county. "Mr. Mercer," Pell said, touching his hat. "Delivered her whole. Roads were fair." "Much obliged, Pell." The woman stepped down before either man could offer a hand, and she landed square on both feet and looked around the yard, once the barn, the corral, the house, the two boys, and then she looked at John. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I'm Emily Carter." "I know who you are." He heard how it came out. Flat, hard. He didn't soften it. She'd answered an advertisement and taken a position, and she'd come a long way to fill it, and John Mercer had decided somewhere on the far side of the last winter that he was done softening things for anybody's comfort. Softness cost too much. Softness was a room with a door you couldn't close again. "You have the terms," he said. "I have them. I'd like to hear them from you all the same." That stopped him a half second. He hadn't expected her to want to hear them again. Most folks, when they'd already agreed to a thing in writing, were glad to skip the saying of it out loud. "Room and board," he said. $6 a month. You cook, you clean, you keep the house and see to the boys' meals and their washing. You don't touch the stock and you don't touch the books. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't suit you, or it doesn't suit me, you leave. No hard feelings and no notice owed on either side. That's fair. It's the whole of it. I heard the whole of it." She had a low voice, steadier than he'd have credited a woman on a strange road in a strange county to have. "You left one thing out, though." "Did I?" "You didn't tell me their names." John looked at her. She was not a young girl, and she was not an old maid. She was somewhere in the middle years where a woman had lived enough to have lost things, and was still standing anyway. There was dust across her collar, and her knuckles were red the way a working woman's knuckles got, and she wasn't looking at him now. She was looking past him at the boys. "Noah," John said. "The tall one. He's 11. And Eli, he's 8. Noah, Eli." She said the names like she was setting them down careful on a shelf. "I'm pleased to know you both." Noah didn't move. He stood with his thumbs in his belt, the way he'd seen the ranch hands do, and he looked at Emily Carter with an expression John had learned to read and didn't like reading. It wasn't rudeness. Noah wasn't a rude boy. It was worse than rudeness. It was a kind of bracing the look a person got when they'd already decided how a thing was going to end and were only waiting for it to get there. "You cook?" Noah asked. "I do." "Ma said the last one couldn't cook. Said she near burned the place down twice." "Noah," John said. "It's all right," Emily said. "It's a fair question. A body ought to know if the food's going to poison them. She looked at the boy straight. I can cook. I won't burn your house down. If I do, you have my leave to tell your pa and put me on the next wagon back to Larkspur. Noah didn't smile, but something in the set of his shoulders shifted a hair like a door being tested to see if it was locked. Eli said nothing at all. The younger boy stood half behind his brother, one hand fisted in the back of Noah's shirt, and he watched Emily Carter with eyes gone wide and flat and old. John felt the sight of it go through him like cold water. Eli had been a talker once. A year ago, you couldn't get the boy to hush. He'd narrate the whole world at you, every bird and beetle and cloud shaped like something. And then his mother had gone into the ground on a raw March morning, and the boy had folded up his words and put them away somewhere, and John hadn't found where. Nobody had found where. Eli, John said, say how do. Eli didn't say how do. He doesn't talk much, Noah said, quick-stepping half in front of his brother. It ain't rudeness, he just don't. That's all right too, Emily said, and she said it easy, like a woman who'd been told a great many things were all right in her life and had made peace with most of them. A person doesn't owe anybody words they haven't got ready yet. She didn't crouch down to Eli's level. She didn't put out a hand or call him sweetheart, or any of the fool things people had been doing to the boy for a year, the things that made him fold up smaller. She just nodded at him, one person to another, the same nod she'd have given a grown man, and then she looked back at the trunk. How long you figure on staying? Noah asked. The question came flat and hard out of the 11-year-old, and Pell, the driver, shifted his feet like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. And John opened his mouth to check the boy, but Emily answered first, and she answered it straight, no softening, no lie. I don't figure on a number, she said. Folks who count out how long they'll stay before they've unpacked, in my experience, they're already halfway gone. I brought a trunk, not a satchel. That's the only answer I've got for you today, and you're welcome to weigh it however you like. Noah weighed it. He didn't say whether it passed. Where would you like this, Mr. Mercer? He put her in the room off the kitchen that had been the hired girl's room when there'd been money for a hired girl back before Martha's doctoring bills had eaten the last of it. It had a bed and a washstand and a window that looked out on the vegetable patch gone half to weeds, and Emily Carter looked at all of it and said it would do fine. Supper's at 6, John said from the doorway. The boys eat what's put in front of them. I'll be in from the west fence by then most nights. Some nights I won't. I'll keep a plate. No need. If I'm not at the table at 6, I've likely eaten cold in the saddle, and I'll not want it. I'll keep a plate, she said again, not arguing, just stating it the way a person stated that the sun would come up. And John found he didn't have anywhere to put that. It wasn't defiance. He'd have known what to do with defiance. It was just a woman deciding in the first hour of her employment that there'd be a plate kept for him whether he wanted one or not, and looking at him steady while she decided it. He went out to the west fence. He'd been at it an hour sinking a new post where the old one had rotted through when he heard a rider come up the section road, and he straightened and put his hand to the small of his back, and saw it was Del Rourke off the neighboring spread, ambling along on that ugly roan of his. Mercer, Rourke called, reining up. Rourke. Hot enough for you? It'll do. Rourke leaned on his saddle horn and looked off toward the house, and John knew what was coming before it came, because in a county like this, a wagon didn't come up a widower's road at midday without the whole of Larkspur knowing by supper. Heard you took on help. Housekeeper, for the boys. That's so. Rourke chewed on that. Halloran no. John's hands went still on the post. What's it to Halloran who cooks my supper? Easy now, I'm only saying. Rourke held up a hand peaceable. You know how the man is. He's called that note twice since spring, and folks are saying he means to make examples this year of anybody who's fallen behind. Anybody who looks, he hunted for the word improvident. $6 a month to a hired woman when a man's behind on his paper. Halloran's the kind to hear about a thing like that and file it away. Halloran can file whatever he likes. I'm on your side, Mercer. I'm just telling you what's said. Rourke gathered his reins. The man holds paper on half this valley now. He bought up the Dvorak note and the Ackley note, and he's patient as a spider about it. You do well not to give him one more reason to look your way is all. A man alone folks leave be. A man taking on help spending money, that's a man they start to reckon up. My arrangements are my own. They surely are. Rourke touched his hat. Fine-looking day. Give the boys my best. And he rode on, and John stood at the fence with the post half sunk and his jaw set hard, because Rourke was a gossip and half a fool. But he wasn't wrong about Halloran, and John Mercer knew it. The bank in Larkspur held the note on the Mercer place, same as it held the note on half the valley, and Cyrus Halloran was not a forgiving man. And a widower falling behind was a widower the bank could squeeze without much fear of who'd take his part. John had known that for a year. He'd just spent $6 a month on a housekeeper anyway, and standing there in the heat with the sweat running down his back, he could not have told a living soul why he'd done a thing so plainly foolish. He drove the post the rest of the way down harder than it needed driving. He stayed out there past when the light started to go longer than the work called for, and when he finally came in the yard, was blue with dusk, and the kitchen window was lit up gold. He stood in the yard a minute, looking at that light. There'd been a stretch this last year where he'd come home to a dark house more nights than not, because he couldn't make himself light the lamps, and the boys were afraid to, and they'd all three eaten bread and cold meat in the dark, like animals in a den, and nobody had said anything about it, because there was nothing to say. The lit window did something to him he didn't have a name for and didn't want one. He washed at the pump longer than he needed to. When he came in, the boys were already at the table, and there was food on it. Real food, a pot of something with meat in it, and biscuits gone gold on top, and a dish of greens. And John stopped in the doorway, because the smell of it hit him somewhere below, reason somewhere that remembered. "Sit if you're sitting," Emily said, not turning from the stove. "It's hot now. It won't be in 10 minutes. He sat. Noah was eating already, head down, shoveling it the way a boy ate when he'd been hungry longer than a boy ought to be. Eli had his spoon in his fist and was moving the food around his bowl without much of it reaching his mouth, but he was at the table, and he was upright, and that was more than some nights. "This is good," Noah said. He said it grudging like it cost him. "The biscuits." "My mother's recipe," Emily said. She'd be pleased to hear a growing boy approved. She always said a biscuit that didn't get approved of wasn't worth the flour. Noah almost smiled. John saw it come, and saw the boy strangle it. Saw him remember something, and put the near smile away, and John knew what the boy had remembered, because he'd remembered it himself. You didn't let yourself like the person who was going to leave. You'd learned that. All three of them had learned that in this house, in the hard way more than once. The county was full of women who'd come to help a widower with young sons and stayed a season and gone. The widow Ackley. The girl from the Dvorak place. Martha's own cousin who'd lasted the longest and hurt the worst in the leaving. People don't stay. That was the rule of the house now. You could carve it over the door. John ate. He ate more than he'd meant to. He ate like a man who'd forgotten what a hot supper did to a body, and when he was done, he pushed the bowl back and said, "It was fine," and got up because that was as far as he could go and still keep the door shut. "There's more if you want it," Emily said. "I've had my sufficiency. Boys, wash up and get to bed." He meant to go straight out to the porch, but he stopped in the hall a moment in the dark of it where they couldn't see him, because Emily Carter had come out of the kitchen drying her hands and had stopped in front of the horse. The drawing was pinned to the wall by the stairs, curled and yellowed, a horse done in a child's blunt pencil, with the legs too long and the mane like a scribble of storm. Eli had drawn it 2 winters back, and Martha had pinned it up, and it had stayed there through everything, because taking it down was a thing nobody in the house was able to do. "Who's the artist?" Emily asked. She asked it to the room, not to anybody. Noah at the foot of the stairs went still. "Eli," he said. "He's got an eye. Look at the way the neck comes down. That's a hard thing to get the neck of a horse." She wasn't gushing. She said it the way a person said a true thing. "What's the horse's name?" Noah's mouth worked. From the top of the stairs where Eli had gone up 2 steps and stopped, the small boy watched. "Duchess," Noah said low. It was Ma's mare. We don't have her no more. Pa had to sell her last fall. She must have been a fine mare to get drawn so careful." Emily didn't turn around, didn't make a thing of it, kept her eyes on the paper. "A person doesn't take that much trouble over a horse they don't love." And then, to the small shape on the stairs, still not turning easy as breathing. "You keep at it, Eli. A hand that can draw a neck like that has got something in it worth keeping at." Nobody said anything, but Eli didn't go up the rest of the stairs. He came back down and sat on the 3rd step in the dark, closer to a stranger than he'd let himself get to anybody in a year. And he looked at his own drawing on the wall like he was seeing it new. John stood in the black of the hall and watched his younger son sit down on the stairs to be near a woman who'd been under his roof 9 hours, and he had to press his knuckles hard against his mouth to keep from making a sound. Though whether it would have come out a sob or something worse, he could never after have said. He went out onto the porch to have his pipe and be alone with the dark. And he sat out there a long while longer than the pipe lasted, and he heard the sounds of the house behind him. Water-poured dishes stacked. The low murmur of a voice telling the boys something, not what. Just the sound of it. A woman's voice moving through his house at the end of the day. It was a sound he'd told himself he was done hearing. He'd made his peace with the silence. He'd worked hard at that peace. He'd earned it. And now there was a voice in the kitchen, and a light in the window, and a woman keeping a plate for him. And John Mercer sat on his own porch and felt the peace he'd built crack down the middle like river ice in spring, and he hated it, and he could not for the life of him make himself go tell her to stop. He couldn't sleep. That wasn't new. He hadn't slept a whole night through since March, a year gone. But this was a different not sleeping. This was the kind where a man got up and paced because lying still had become its own kind of work. Past midnight he came down for water, moving quiet out of long habit so as not to wake the boys, and he came to the foot of the stairs and stopped. The kitchen lamp was still burning, turned low. And Emily Carter was sitting at his table, not working, not sewing, not writing a letter, not doing any of the 100 things a person might sit at a table at midnight to do. She had a cup of something gone cold in front of her, and her hands folded around it, and she was just sitting there in his kitchen in the low lamplight, like she belonged, like the chair had always had her in it, like she'd been sitting there for years, and he'd only just now walked in. Something about it caught in his chest and turned. "You're up late," John said. She didn't startle. He'd have thought a woman alone at midnight would startle at a man's voice, but she only turned her head and looked at him unhurried. "So are you." "I came down for water." "Water's in the crock. I filled it before I sat." He crossed to the crock and dipped himself a cup and drank it and didn't leave. He should have left. He stood there instead with the empty cup in his hand and looked at her sitting in the chair, and the longer he looked, the more it worked at him. Though he could not have said why a woman sitting quiet should work at a man so. "You've had a long day," he said. "Traveling. You ought to sleep." "I ought to. I don't much." She said it plain, no self-pity in it. "Haven't for a while. I find a lit room easier than a dark one past midnight. So I sit. In the kitchen. It's a good kitchen, warm still from the stove." She turned the cold cup a quarter turn in her hands. "I'm not in your way, Mr. Mercer. If I am, say so, and I'll take myself off to my room and sit in the dark like a Christian." "You're not in my way." He heard himself say it, and it was true, and it bothered him that it was true. She wasn't in his way. That was the whole trouble. A person in your way, you could move around, could ask to move, could resent honestly and openly. But she was just sitting in a chair in a house that had 4 chairs and 3 people, and she wasn't in anybody's way at all. And John Mercer stood in his own kitchen at midnight and could not understand why the sight of her there in that 4th chair made him want to say something cruel. He knew, actually. He knew exactly why. He just wouldn't look at it straight. The 4th chair. He'd carried it out to the barn back in the fall, that chair, because he couldn't sit down to supper across from an empty place. One more night, couldn't watch the boys not look at where their mother used to sit. He'd hauled it out to the barn and hung a bridle on it and told himself it was a chair, just a chair, and a chair in a barn was as good as a chair in a kitchen. And then last week, when the letter came, saying the woman had taken the position and would arrive, he'd gone out to the barn in the dark and brought the chair back in and set it at the table, and he'd stood there in the kitchen at midnight just like now, just exactly like now, and looked at 4 chairs at a table again, and felt like a man betraying somebody. Though he couldn't have said who. He'd told himself it was so the hired woman would have a place to sit. "That chair suit you," he said. It came out rougher than he meant. Emily looked down at the chair she was in like she'd forgotten it was under her. "It's a good chair," she said. "It's not—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter." Was it hers? The question landed in the quiet kitchen, soft as a hand on a shoulder, and John felt it in his throat, and for a second, one bad second, he thought he might not be able to answer it at all. "How'd you know to ask that?" he said. "I didn't know. I asked." She was watching him now, and there was nothing prying in it, nothing hungry, the way some folks got hungry around another person's grief. She just looked at him like the question was a door she'd knocked on, and she'd wait however long it took, or go away quiet, if he wanted either one. "The house told me some of it. A house always does. There's a drawing of a horse pinned in the hall done by a small hand, and nobody's took it down though it's curled at the edges. There's a woman's shawl on the peg by the door still and dust on it, which means nobody wears it, and nobody can bring themselves to move it. And there's a 4th chair at a table for 3, and when I sat down in it, your older boy watched me like I'd sat on a grave." She turned the cup again. "So, was it hers?" John set his cup down on the sideboard. His hand was not quite steady, and he was glad of the low light. "Her name was Martha," he said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud in months. He'd thought it. God knew he'd thought it all day, every day, that name going around and around like a millstone. But he hadn't said it not to the boys, not to a soul, and it came out of him now in the midnight kitchen to a woman he'd known for 9 hours, and it cost him something to let it go. And it eased something too, and both those at once made a man feel like his chest had been split open. "Martha," Emily said. Careful. The way she'd said the boys' names, setting it down on a shelf where it wouldn't get broken. "I won't sit in her chair again if you'd rather. It's a chair. Sit where you like. It's not just a chair. You know it's not, or you'd not have asked." She got to her feet, then unhurried and gathered her cold cup, and she looked at him across the low-lit kitchen, with something in her face that wasn't pity. He'd have thrown pity back at her, but was something quieter and harder to refuse. "I'll tell you what I told your boy about the words. I'll not sit anywhere that hurts you, Mr. Mercer. But I'll not tiptoe around this house like it's a sick room either. A house full of people afraid to sit in chairs and afraid to say a dead woman's name that's not honoring anybody. That's just 3 folks and a stranger all holding their breath together waiting on the next one to leave." The word leave hung in the air between them. John looked at her a long moment. "They think you'll leave," he said. "The boys. That's what that look was. Every woman who's come to help since Martha died has gone before the year turned. Noah's counting the days. He counted the last ones too. He knows how many she stayed. 91. John hadn't known he knew that number until it was out of his mouth. 91 days. He'll be counting yours by morning. Then he'll count, Emily said. Boys need something to do with a worry that big. Counting's as good as anything. My own brother counted the days our father was gone to the war, made a mark on the barn wall for every one. When Pa came home, the marks went halfway round the barn, and Pa never said a word about it. Just went out with the whitewash one evening and painted over the whole of them. I asked him why. He said a boy oughtn't have to look at how scared he'd been every time he went out to milk the cow. She rinsed her cup at the basin and set it to dry. But you might tell Noah something for me when the counting starts. Tell him what? She dried her hands on her apron and looked at John Mercer in the last of the lamplight, and there was nothing soft in it and nothing promised in it, just a plain, flat statement of fact from a woman who'd learned to mean the few things she said. Tell him I didn't come here to leave. I came here to work. Leaving wasn't in the terms. And she took the lamp and went into the little room off the kitchen and shut the door quiet, and left John Mercer standing in the dark in his own house, with 4 chairs at a table, and a dead woman's name still warm in his mouth, and a thing loose in his chest that he had spent a whole hard year nailing shut. He stood there a long time. Then he went and sat down in the dark at the table in his own chair, not hers, not Martha's. And he put his head in his hands, and he did not weep because he had forgotten how. But he sat there until the window went gray, and for the first time in a long while he was not alone in the house with the silence. There was a woman asleep or not asleep, sitting up in a lit room more like 12 feet away, who had said she didn't come here to leave. And John Mercer, who knew better, who had learned better in the hardest school there was, sat in the dark and could not stop himself from wanting just a little, just against every hard-won lesson he owned, to believe her. The wind came up before dawn and worked at the loose board on the north side of the porch, the one he kept meaning to nail down and never did. And for once, the sound of it didn't make the house feel emptier. It just made it feel like a house where somebody was going to be awake to hear it. By the time the window went full gold, Noah Mercer was already out at the barn with a nail in his hand, and John found him there scratching a single mark into the gray wood of the doorframe, low down where a boy would put a thing he didn't want a grown person to see. "What's that?" John said. Noah didn't jump. He'd learned not to jump. "Nothing. Looks like a mark." "It's a mark." "Day 1, John said. The boy's hand went still on the nail. He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. And John stood there and thought about telling him what the woman had said. To tell him I didn't come here to leave, leaving wasn't in the terms, and then he didn't tell him, because a man couldn't hand a boy a promise he hadn't made himself. And John Mercer had made no promises to anybody in a year, and meant to keep on making none. "Milk's not going to draw itself," he said, and went into breakfast. She had it on the table. Eggs and side meat and coffee that a man could stand a spoon in, and Eli already in his chair with his hair wet-combed flat, which nobody had done to Eli in a year. And John looked at the boy's slicked down hair and had to turn and hang his hat on the peg so nobody would see his face. "He let me comb it," Emily said low at the stove. "I asked him first. He nodded, that's all. I'd not have touched him without he said." He nodded. He did. John sat. He ate. He did not say thank you because thank you was a word that opened a door, and he'd told himself the door stayed shut. But he ate every egg on the plate, and when Eli small silent. Eli pushed the last of his own side meat across the table onto his father's plate without a word, the way he used to do when he was 5, and thought his pa hung the moon. John Mercer had to set down his fork and look at the wall a while. That was the first day. There were a good many days after it, and they went the way she'd said they would, which was to say they went quiet, and things got solved that nobody had asked her to solve. The hinge on the smokehouse door that had shrieked for a year stopped shrieking. The socks that had gone to holes got darned in the evenings while she sat in the lamplight. The garden that had gone to weeds came back in rows, and there were beans on the table in July that John hadn't planted and hadn't watered and couldn't account for, except that a woman had knelt in the dirt every dawn before he was up and made them grow. And every night at supper, 4 chairs. And every night John sat in his and the boys in theirs, and Emily in the 4th, and nobody said whose it had been, and the not saying got a little easier each time like a bruise. A man learns to press on until one day he presses and it doesn't hurt. "You solved the pump," John said one evening. It was the nearest he'd come to a thank you in 3 weeks. The pump solved itself. It only wanted the leather cup swapped. Any fool with a knife could have done it. "I didn't do it." "You've been busy," Emily said, and left it there, and did not say what they both knew, which was that he'd walked past that dry pump for a year and hauled water from the crick, rather than lay a hand to a thing that Martha used to work the handle of. Noah watched all of it. He watched the way a boy watches weather, and he made his mark on the doorframe every morning. One scratch, and he said nothing, and John said nothing about the marks. But the count climbed 9, 10, 14, and John caught himself more than once going out to the barn in the evening to look at how many there were. The way a man checks a wound to see, is it closing or is it going bad? Then, on the 19th day, the schoolmaster's note came home in Noah's fist, folded small and damp, and the boy tried to burn it in the stove before Emily saw it. She saw it. "Give it here." "It ain't yours." "It's got my supper table's name on it, so it's mine enough. Give it here, Noah." He gave it. She read it standing up, and her face didn't change, which was its own kind of answer, and Noah stood by the door with his jaw set exactly like his father's, and his eyes gone bright and hard. "You fought the Pruitt boy," Emily said. "He had it coming." "That's not what I asked. I asked, did you fight him?" "I whipped him," Noah said, and there was a shake under it he was trying to keep down. "I whipped him good, and I ain't sorry." "Sit down." "I don't have to." "You don't have to. I'm asking. Sit." He sat because there was something in the way she said it that a boy couldn't argue with, not because it was hard, but because it was the voice of somebody who wasn't going to yell, and wasn't going to fetch a switch, and wasn't going to tell his pa. And that was a stranger thing to Noah Mercer than any punishment. "What did he say?" Emily asked. Noah's mouth worked. "Nothing." "Boys don't get whipped good over nothing. What did he say?" And here the boy's chin came down, and the hardness cracked, and out of the crack came the thing he'd been carrying all day like a stone in his shirt. "He said you weren't gonna stay." Noah's voice went thin. "He said his ma said you were just the newest one, and you'd be gone by the fall like all of 'em, and I was a fool for—" He stopped. "For what?" "For letting Eli comb his hair like he cared," Noah said, and the last of it came out ragged. "He said Eli was going to get his heart broke again, and it'd be my fault for not stopping it, 'cause I'm the big one, and I'm supposed to—" His voice went out entirely. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes hard, the way boys do when crying is the last thing on earth they'll allow. "So I whipped him, and I ain't sorry." Emily didn't move to him. She didn't gather him up. She sat down across the table slow, and she folded the schoolmaster's note in half, and in half again. And when she spoke, her voice was as level as a table. "You listen to me now, Noah Mercer, because I'm only going to say it the once." She waited until he took his hands off his eyes. "You are not the big one who has to hold this house up. You're 11 years old. Somewhere along the way, somebody handed you a load that's a grown man's load, and you've been carrying it so long you forgot it was ever put on you and didn't grow on you natural. Well, I'm here now, and part of what $6 a month buys your pa is a woman to carry some of that load off a boy's back. You hear me? The Pruitt boy's ma can say what she likes at her own table. At this one, you're a boy, just a boy. And a boy is allowed to let his brother comb his hair and hope. That ain't foolishness. That's the bravest thing a person does." Noah stared at her. "You're gonna leave," he said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't quite an accusation. It was a boy laying his whole hand on the table, every card, because he'd rather be told the truth now than robbed of it later. "I'm not," Emily said. "Everybody says—" "I don't much care what everybody says. I care what I do. And what I do is stay till I'm told to go, and your pa hasn't told me to go, and I don't believe he's going to." She stood and put the folded note in her apron pocket. "Now, you're going to eat your supper, and tomorrow you're going to school, and you're going to tell the Pruitt boy you're sorry for whipping him, not because he didn't earn it, but because a Mercer doesn't settle a thing with his fists when his words are working. And they'll be working, Noah, because you'll have practiced them on me tonight. Wash up." He washed up, and John Mercer, who had been standing in the dark of the hall through the whole of it, who had come in from the corral in time to hear his son say, "You're gonna get his heart broke again," and it'd be my fault, who had stood frozen with his hand on the door. John went back out into the yard without being seen, and stood at the corral rail in the last of the light with his hat off, and could not for a long while make himself go in and sit down at a table where a woman had just done in 20 minutes what he had failed to do in a year, which was tell his son the truth and mean it. He didn't thank her for that one either. But that night after the boys were down, he brought in an armload of stovewood without being asked and stacked it by the box. And Emily looked at the wood and looked at the man and understood that it was the only language he had left, and said, "That'll save me a trip in the morning," and let him keep his silence, because she was the kind of woman who knew that some men say thank you with their backs bent under a load of wood. The count on the door frame climbed. 19. 22. 26. Then the trouble came the way trouble comes on a fine, clear morning with no warning at all. A buggy turned up the Mercer Road black and polished, and John saw it from the hayfield and set down his fork and knew before it stopped who it would be, because a buggy that clean didn't belong to any man who worked for a living. It belonged to a man who worked other men. Mr. Mercer? The rider was Halloran's clerk, a soft-handed fellow named Deems, in a town coat too warm for July. He didn't get down. Men who carried other men's paper never got down. They liked the height. "I've a letter for you. From the bank." "Read it to me. My hands are full of hay." "It's a formal notice, Mr. Mercer. Mr. Halloran prefers—" "Then Mr. Halloran can prefer it from up there while you read it, or he can come say it to me himself one. I'm not going to wash up and put on a collar to be told bad news on my own land. Read it." Deems read it. And the reading of it was worse than the man's soft hands had promised. The note on the Mercer placed the mortgage John's father had taken, and John had carried, and Martha's doctoring had swollen was called. Not the interest, the whole of it. Payable in full by the last day of August, or the bank would move to foreclose, and the Mercer place cattle and land and house and barn, and every last board of it, would go to auction on the courthouse steps in Larkspur. "That's 6 weeks," John said. His voice had gone very flat. "You're telling me the whole note in 6 weeks?" "Mr. Halloran is within his rights. The note has a demand clause. You signed it." "My father signed it." "You assumed it, sir. It's all one in the eyes of the paper. Nobody's called a whole note in this valley in 20 years. You call the interest. You extend. That's how it's done. Times are changing, Mr. Mercer." Deems folded the letter and held it down for John to take, and John didn't take it, so Deems set it on the fence post. "Mr. Halloran is consolidating. He feels the valley's better served by fewer sounder operations. He wishes you no ill. He simply wishes his money." The clerk gathered his reins. 6 weeks, the last day of August. Good day to you." And the clean black buggy turned and went back down the road, and John Mercer stood in his hayfield with the letter on the post and his whole life inside 6 weeks, and did not move for a long, long time. He didn't tell her. He came in to supper with his face like a shut door and ate what was put in front of him and said not one word about the buggy, though he knew she'd seen it because she saw everything. And Emily watched him across the fourth chair and did not ask, because she was the kind of woman who knew. There's a difference between a silence you keep and a silence you're drowning in, and she meant to let him choose the moment he came up for air. The moment came 3 days later, and it came the way disaster loves to come, riding on the back of an ordinary chore. John was up on the barn roof. He had no business being up there. A man with a called note and 6 weeks had 100 more pressing things than a loose shake on a barn roof. But that was exactly why he was up there, because a man who can't fix his whole life will climb up and fix the one small broke thing he can reach, just to feel his hands mend something. He was reaching for the loose shake when the old ladder rung gave. Emily heard the sound of it from the garden. Not the fall, the sound before the fall, the crack of dry wood, and then a man's short cut-off shout, and then the worst sound, the sound of a body coming off a roof and meeting the ground. She was there before the boys. "John!" She was on her knees in the dirt beside him, and it was the first time she'd used his given name, and neither of them marked it then. "John, where? Tell me where." "Leg." His face had gone gray. "Left leg. Don't touch it. It's—" He got his teeth around it. "It's broke. I know how it feels. It's broke." "Noah?" Emily didn't turn her head. "Noah, saddle the fast horse and ride for Doc Herschel in Larkspur, and you don't stop, and you don't spare the horse. You hear me? Go now, Eli." And here her voice gentled without losing an ounce of its iron. "Eli, honey, fetch me the 2 straight boards off the woodpile, the flat ones, and your pa's good shirt off the line, the one drying white. Can you do that for me?" And Eli silent, Eli who had not fetched a thing for anybody in a year, who let the world happen around him. Like weather, Eli ran. He ran and he came back with the boards and the shirt, and Emily splinted the leg there in the dirt with her own hands, while John Mercer ground his teeth to keep from crying out in front of his sons. and she talked the whole time in a low, even voice. Not to the boys, to him, saying, "Easy. Now that's it. Breathe out on the count. You've had worse from a horse, I'll wager easy, until the leg was bound, and the worst of the moving was done." "You've done this before." John got out. "Set a bone some." "Where?" "Later," Emily said. "Later when you're not gray as a fish. Noah's gone for the doctor. You're going to lie right here in the shade of your own barn like a sensible man, and you're not going to move that leg. And I'm going to sit here beside you, and if you pass out, I'll not tell a soul you did it. So go on and pass out if you're going to." A pause. "You went up on that roof because you couldn't stand it, didn't you?" The note. John's gray face turned toward her. "You knew. I saw the buggy. I heard the man read it." "No, don't look at me like that. I wasn't listening at a keyhole. The man had a carrying voice and I was hanging wash. 6 weeks. The whole of it." Her hand was flat and steady on his chest, holding him still, and she looked down at him, with something in her face he had never once seen turned on him in a year of people turning faces on him. Not pity, not fear, just a plain, unflinching there-ness, a woman deciding out loud again that she wasn't going anywhere. "You should have told me. It's not your trouble." "John Mercer, I have darned your socks and grown your beans and set your leg in the dirt of your own yard, and you're going to tell me it's not my trouble." Something almost like a laugh dry as a stick. "It became my trouble the day I unpacked my trunk. Now lie still." He lay still, and that was how the second thing changed. The thing that couldn't be undone after, because a man can hold a woman at arm's length across a supper table for a long while, but he cannot hold her at arm's length when she is kneeling in the dirt with his blood on her sleeve and his broke leg in her 2 hands, telling him to breathe. Something in John Mercer, some last nailed-shut board over some last dark window, came loose in that yard and would not go back. Doc Herschel came and set the leg proper and splinted it in plaster and wood, and told John Mercer in plain words, what John already knew, that he'd not put weight on it for 6 weeks, that a man with a barn to run and a note to pay could not have picked a worse season to come off a roof, and that whoever had splinted it in the field had done it right and likely saved him a limp for life. "Who set this?" Herschel asked. "She did." The doctor looked at Emily and something passed over his face, some recollection trying to surface, and Emily met his look flat and said, "The boy rode fast, doctor. You'll want to walk that horse cool before he stands," and turned the man's mind deft, as turning a page back to the horse, but John saw it. John saw the doctor almost place her and Emily, turn him away from it, and John filed it the way a man files a thing he doesn't understand, but knows he'll need. That night was the night Eli talked. John was laid up in the front room, where they'd made him a bed because the stairs were beyond him, and the boys were supposed to be asleep, and Emily was banking the stove for the night when she heard the small feet on the boards behind her. "You should be in bed, honey," she said, not turning, giving the boy his room the way she always did. Eli didn't go back to bed. He stood there in his nightshirt, and Emily turned finally and looked at him, and the boy's face was working at something the way a pump works before the water comes, and she knelt down slow, not to crowd him, just to be nearer his height. "What is it, Eli?" And Eli Mercer, who had not said one word to one living soul since a raw March morning, a year and more gone, who had folded his voice up and hid it away where his own father couldn't find it, opened his mouth and pushed the words out through the rust of a year like a boy lifting a stone off his own chest. "Is Pa gonna die?" Emily did not gasp. She did not clap a hand to her mouth, or call out for John, or make the boy's first 3 words in a year into a spectacle he could never take back. She held herself dead still, the way you hold still for a wild thing that has come trembling right up to your open hand. "No," she said. Steady. Sure. "No, honey. Your pa broke his leg. It's a bad break and it hurts him, and he's going to be a poor-tempered old bear about it for 6 weeks. But he is not going to die. I set the bone myself, and Doc Herschel set it again, and it's going to knit up strong, and by the first frost your pa'll be walking on it and hollering at you to shut the barn door. He is not going to die." Eli's chin shook. "My ma died," he said. I know she did. She said she'd be all right. She told me she'd be all right, and then she—" The words broke apart. "So when people say all right, it ain't." "I know." Emily's voice never rose. "I know, honey. People said all right to you once, and it wasn't, and now the words broke for you, and you can't trust it. That's the most sensible thing I ever heard a boy say." She held out her hand, just held it out flat in the space between them, and left it to him. "So I won't say all right. I'll say this instead, and it's a truer thing. Your pa is going to hurt, and it's going to be hard, and I am going to be right here in this house, the whole of it, and I am not going anywhere, and you can come find me any hour of any night, and put your hand in mine, and know I'm still here. That's not all right. That's just true. Will that do?" Eli looked at the open hand a long time. Then he put his small one in it. And in the front room in the dark, John Mercer lay with his broke leg, and his eyes wide open, and his face turned to the wall. And he had heard every word. And he wept silently, the way a proud man weeps, so no one would know, not for his leg, and not even for his boy's voice come back from wherever it had been buried, but for the plain, unbearable fact that a stranger he'd hired at $6 a month had just given his son the one thing he, the boy's own father, had not been able to give him in a year of trying, a true thing to hold on to that wouldn't break in his hand. Then 6 weeks of a man who could not walk, and a woman who could, and a ranch that did not care whose leg was broke. She ran it. That was the plain, unvarnished fact of it, and it undid the last of John Mercer's notions about what a woman hired to cook and clean could or couldn't do. Emily Carter got the hay in. She hired on the Dvorak boys for $1 a day out of money John didn't know she had, and she stood in the yard and she directed them, and when the mower jammed, she got down under it and unjammed it with her own hands and came up greased to the elbow. She doctored the yearling that took sick. She mended the tools that broke. She sat John Mercer in a chair on the porch, where he could see his own land being worked without him, and could do nothing but watch and hate it, and underneath the hating of it, feel a thing he had no name for and was afraid to look at, which was the feeling of a load being lifted off a man who'd carried it alone so long he'd forgot it had a weight. "You can't do all this," he said one evening from his chair, watching her come in from the barn, wiping her hands. "I'm doing it. On $6 a month. Dollars, eh? I'm not doing it for the $6. She said it before she'd thought whether to say it, and then it was said, and neither of them touched it, and she went in to start the supper. And John Mercer sat on his porch, with his broke leg out in front of him, and turned that sentence over and over like a stone, with something written on the underside he couldn't quite read in the dark. She had to go to town that week because a ranch runs on more than beans, and John couldn't sit a horse, so Emily took the wagon into Larkspur alone with a list in her apron, and Noah on the seat beside her because a boy ought to learn the town, and a woman alone drew talk. The town gave her the talk anyway. She felt it the moment the wagon came down the main street, the way the women on the boardwalk stopped their talking and started it again lower. The way heads turned and turned back, the way the whole street seemed to know exactly who she was, and exactly whose porch she'd come off of. "That's her," a woman said, not troubling much to keep it down. "The Mercer one, living out there with him and no ring on her and his wife not cold 2 winters. Noah went stiff on the seat. His hand found the edge of the board and gripped it white. "Eyes front, Noah," Emily said, easy low. "Don't give 'em the pleasure of your face. They can't say that about you. They can say whatever they like. It costs them nothing, and it costs us nothing, unless we let it." She set the brake outside the mercantile. "A person who's got nothing to be ashamed of doesn't have to walk fast. Remember that. We'll walk slow." They walked slow. And in the mercantile, the storekeeper's wife, a narrow woman named Mrs. Cobb, with a mouth like a coin purse, made Emily wait while she served 2 women who'd come in after her, and then made a show of adding up the bill twice, and then said loud enough for the store, "Cash I'll need. The Mercer account's not one I can extend just now. Bank's advice." The store went quiet. "Bank's advice," Emily repeated. "Mr. Halloran's been kind enough to advise us local merchants which accounts are sound." Mrs. Cobb folded her hands on the counter. "A prudent woman looks to her own risk." And there it was. Halloran reaching down off his clean buggy and into the mercantile itself, into the flour and the coffee, squeezing not with a fist, but with a whisper past merchant to merchant sound account, unsound account, so that a broke-legged man's boy couldn't buy a sack of flour without the whole town knowing his father was a marked man. It was, Emily thought, exactly precisely the way he'd done it before, in another town under another name that was the same name. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. He just leaned on the money, and the money leaned on everybody else. Emily counted the coins out of her apron, her own coins, the ranch coins she'd earned, and set them on the counter, one at a time, unhurried, until the whole bill was there in hard money and not a cent of credit asked. "There's your cash, Mrs. Cobb." She stacked the last coin. "You can tell Mr. Halloran when you're passing along your advice that the Mercer account pays in silver and doesn't need his opinion of it. And you can tell him one more thing from me if you would." "And what's that?" "That a man who has to lean on a shopkeeper's wife to fight his battles," Emily said, pleasant as Sunday, "is a man who already knows somewhere down in himself that he's not the biggest thing in the valley, only the loudest. Good day." She took her flour and her coffee and her sack of nails, and she walked out slow, and Noah walked out beside her a half-step taller than he'd walked in. "You told her," Noah breathed once they were on the wagon. "You told the whole store." "I told the truth in a normal voice, that's all. It only sounds loud in a quiet room." She clucked to the horse. "Don't mistake me, Noah. That woman'll have it all over town by supper, and half of them will side with her because most folks would rather be safe with a bully than sorry with the bullied. But not all of them. You watch." And she was right, because that was the day John's redemption started coming back to him from the outside, from a valley that hadn't forgot the man he'd been before. Grief shut him up in his house. Old Dvorak was waiting by the wagon when they came out, the father, not the boys, turning his hat in his big hands. "Ms. Carter." He didn't meet her eye direct. He wasn't a man of many words. "Heard about John's leg. Heard about the other. The note." He worked the hat. "Halloran called mine 2 years back. I found the money. Barely. My boys and me, we know how it sits." He pressed something into her hand, folded. Not much, a few soft bills. A working man's few bills. "It ain't much. Toward the note. Or toward flour if the note's past saving, whichever." "Mr. Dvorak, I can't." "You can, and you will, or you'll shame me in the street." A ghost of something crossed the old face. "John Mercer pulled 2 of my calves out of the Larkspur Creek in the flood of '78, and near drowned doing it, and never once let me thank him proper. So you take that, and you don't tell him where it come from till the note's paid, and then you tell him it come from a man who don't forget. Now get on home before it's dark." And Emily Carter, who had faced down a whole town's cold shoulder without her chin dropping an inch, sat on the wagon seat with a working man's folded bills in her fist, and could not for a moment get a single word out past what was in her throat. "Thank you," she managed. "Git," said old Dvorak, and turned away so she wouldn't see his face, and that was the town of Larkspur, half of it a coin purse with a mouth, and half of it a hard old man who folded his last dollars into a stranger's hand, because a broke-legged neighbor once went into a flood after somebody else's calves. Emily drove home slow in the dusk with Noah quiet beside her, and when they were nearly to the Mercer Road, the boy said out of nowhere in a small voice, "I stopped counting." "Counting what, honey?" "The days. On the door." He looked at his hands. "I rubbed 'em out. This morning before we left. All of 'em." He didn't look at her. "I didn't need to count no more." And Emily Carter, who had held her face together through a whole cruel town, felt it come apart at last, quiet in the dark of the wagon seat, where nobody could see, at the words of an 11-year-old boy who had rubbed the fear off a barn door with his own thumb. "That's good, Noah," was all she trusted herself to say. "That's real good." And the note. The note aided him from his chair. 6 weeks became 5, became 4. He wrote to the bank in Cheyenne and was refused. He wrote to his dead wife's brother in Missouri and got no answer at all. He sat on his porch and did sums on the back of the feed bills, and the sums never came out, no matter how he worked them, and every day, the last day of August, came a day closer, and John Mercer, who could not walk, could not, for all his working out, find the road that led out of it. It was on one of those nights with the boys down and the leg aching and the sums not coming out that he finally asked her. "Where'd you learn to set a bone?" John said. "And run a mower? And where'd you get money to hire the Dvorak boys when I hired you at $6 a month?" Emily was darning by the lamp. She didn't stop the darning right away. When she did stop, she set the sock down in her lap and folded her hands on it and looked into the middle of the room, not at him like a person looking a long way back down a road. "You'll want the whole of it, I expect. I've told you my notes called and my legs broke. I reckon you can tell me where you learned to splint it." "I had a ranch," Emily said. The words dropped into the quiet room and John went still. "I had a ranch," she said again, "in the territory up north of here, with a man named Tom Carter, who was my husband. 12 years. We built it up out of nothing, the two of us, out of a soddy and 100 head of scrub cattle. And by the end, we had good land and good stock, and a frame house with 4 rooms, and I could set a bone and run a mower and doctor a yearling because there wasn't anybody else to do it, and Tom needed me to. So I learned. A woman learns what she has to. What happened to it? The bank happened to it." She looked at him then, and her eyes were dry and very steady, and there was a thing in them older than the leg. He'd broke older than his year of grief. "Tom took a note in a bad year the way men do, and a dry summer came, and the cattle died, and the note came due, and the man who held it would not extend it, not because he couldn't, but because he'd sooner have the land than the money, because the land was worth more. So he called it, the whole of it. And we lost every board, and every acre, and every head, and it went to auction on the courthouse steps, and I stood in the crowd and watched a fat man in a clean coat buy my house for less than we'd spent building the porch." She picked the sock back up. "And 3 months after that, Tom Carter walked out to the barn of the little rented place we'd took, and he did not come back in, and I have not spoken of any of it to a living soul from that day to this." The lamp hissed. Neither of them moved. "So when I saw that black buggy come up your road," Emily said, quiet, threading the needle again, with hands that did not shake, "and heard that soft man read out the whole note, called in 6 weeks. Mr. Mercer, I did not have to ask what it meant. I have stood exactly where you are sitting. I have done the sums that don't come out. I know the man that holds your paper without ever having met him, because I have met him before under a different name, and there is one of him in every valley in the West, and he is patient as a spider, and he does not want your money. He wants your land, and he wants you gone, and a widower with 2 boys and a called note is the easiest thing in the world for a man like that to swallow whole." She looked up. "That's why I stayed, if you want the truth of it. I came here to be a housekeeper, but I stayed because the day that buggy came, I looked at your boys' faces and I thought, not again. Not while I've got 2 hands and I'm standing in the house. I'll not watch it happen to another set of boys. Not if I can help it. Not if I have to work myself to the bone to stop it." John Mercer had gone the whole speech without a word. Now he found he had none. A man who has decided he is alone in a thing wholly and finally alone, and then discovers that the one other person in the room has walked the exact black road ahead of him and come out the far side still standing. That man doesn't have words for a while. "I'm sorry," he said finally. It was inadequate, and he knew it. "About your husband, about Tom. So am I." She bit the thread. "But I didn't tell you for sorrow. I told you so you'd stop doing your sums alone on the backs of feed bills like a man in a locked room. Because you're not in a locked room, John Mercer. I've been in that room. I know where the door is." She set the finished sock down and picked up the next. "And I don't intend to let you lose this place. I don't yet know how. But I've beat this man before in my mind 1,000 nights thinking what I'd have done different, and I have had 4 years to think it, and I am not the girl I was who stood in that crowd and watched. So, John said. "So you can keep your $6 a month," Emily said, "and I'll keep my reasons. And between the 2 of us and those 2 boys asleep upstairs, we are going to make the last day of August a very bad day, for whoever it is holds your note." And John Mercer, sitting in a chair he couldn't rise from with a leg he couldn't stand on, and a life he couldn't save, looked across a lamplit room at a woman he had hired to cook and clean and had not once properly thanked, and felt the thing he'd been afraid to look at all summer come up out of the dark at last, and stand plain in front of him where he could no longer pretend it was something else. He didn't say it. He wasn't ready and might not ever be being the man he was, but he said the next nearest thing. "His name's Halloran," John said. "Cyrus Halloran, Larkspur Bank." And Emily Carter's needle stopped in the cloth. Just for a second. Just one. And then it went on, in and out even as ever. But John saw it stop. And he saw her face in the second before she smoothed it, and what was in her face was not surprise. It was recognition. "You know that name?" John said slow. "Finish your sums for tonight," Emily said, and her voice was level, and she would not look up from the darning, now would not for anything look up. "It's late. That leg heals faster asleep than fretting." "Emily, you know that name." She set the sock down. She sat a moment with her hands flat on it. And when she looked up at last, her eyes had gone to a place he hadn't seen in them yet. A cold, clear, far-off place, the place a person goes to when a thing they buried 4 years deep comes walking back up out of the ground, wearing the same clean coat it wore the day it took everything they had. "Cyrus Halloran," Emily said very quiet, "is the fat man who bought my house on the courthouse steps for less than we spent building the porch." For a while, neither of them said anything at all. "You knew," John said at last. "When you took the position. You knew whose valley you were coming into." "No." She shook her head slow. "I swear to you I did not. I answered an advertisement for a housekeeper on a ranch near Larkspur. I didn't know the name of the man who held its paper any more than I knew the color of the barn. I found that out 3 days ago, sitting in this room from your own mouth." She looked down at her hands. "You want to know what I felt when you said his name? I felt the floor go out. Because I had spent 4 years telling myself I was done with him, that I'd put a whole territory between us. And here I am in a strange man's house 4 years and 100 miles on, and the same fat spider is sitting in the same clean coat waiting to eat the same set of boys, only this time it's your boys, John, and this time I'm not in the crowd. You could go." He said it because he was the kind of man who had to say, the hard thing had to give her the door out loud so she couldn't say, later he'd trapped her. "You've done nothing but good in this house and you owe it nothing. That man took everything you had once. No living soul would blame you for putting the territory between you again. I'll write you a fair character and drive you to the stage myself the day this leg holds me." Emily Carter looked at him a long moment across the dying lamp. "John Mercer," she said, "you are the only man I have met in 4 years who, holding a losing hand with a broke leg and a called note and a spider at his door, would use his breath to hand a woman the way out." She stood and gathered the darning, and her voice was steady as a level laid on stone. "I'm not going to the stage. I ran once. It cost me a husband, and it did not save me 1 single acre. I am done running from Cyrus Halloran." She set her hand flat on the table just once, like a woman signing a thing without ink. "The last day of August, we find out what he's made of, and so does he." The lamp burned down between them, and neither one reached to trim it, and outside the loose board on the north side of the porch worked in the night wind, and for once John Mercer did not hear it at all. The leg mended the way Doc Herschel said it would, slow and mean, and by the second week of August, John Mercer could get across the yard on a crutch cut from an ash limb, cussing every step which Emily took as the surest sign yet that the man would live. "You're standing," she said, watching him come off the porch. "I'm leaning. There's a difference." "Not to a spider, there isn't. A man on his feet is a man who can sell cattle. That's what Halloran's counting on you not doing." She had the coffee poured before he'd got to the table. "So that's what we're going to do." "Sell what cattle? It's August. Nobody buys in August. Buyers come through in the fall drives, you know that. Then we don't wait for a buyer. We take them to one." She sat down across from him, and there was a thing in her face he'd come to know that summer, the flat forward set she got when she'd already worked a problem 3 ways in the night and was only telling him the answer. There's a railhead at Two Forks. Cattle broker there named Semple buys the year round for the Eastern Packers cash on delivery. No note, no bank. It's 4 days' drive north with the herd. If we cut out the 80 head that are fit to ship and drive them to Two Forks and sell them to Semple for cash, we clear the note, and we clear it with a week to spare. John set the coffee down. 4 days' drive. 80 head. With what men? My hired hands are 2 boys and a woman, and one of them's got a broke leg. 3 of them can ride. The Dvorak boys will come for a share of the sale. I already asked. They said yes before I finished the sentence. Noah can point the herd. Eli minds the wagon and the remuda. You ride drag on that mended leg where the work's slow, and I take the lead. She said it like it was already done. It's thin, John. I'll not pretend it isn't. But thin's not the same as impossible, and I have driven cattle before, and so have you. And 80 head is a small herd, and 4 days is a short drive, and the only thing standing between us and cash money is whether you've got the sand to do a hard thing on a bad leg. John Mercer looked at her a long moment. You've thought of everything, he said. I've thought of everything I can. There's always the thing you can't. She stood and took his empty cup. But I'd sooner meet the thing I can't out on a trail with a herd and a plan than sit in this kitchen, waiting for the last day of August to walk in that door. Wouldn't you? And that was how they came to be cutting cattle in the near pasture. 2 mornings later, the whole strange outfit of them, a woman on the lead, 2 hired boys flanking a silent 8-year-old on the wagon seat, holding the lines like they were made of glass, and John Mercer riding drag on a leg that screamed at every jog. And for a day and a half it worked. For a day and a half, John Mercer let himself believe. Then the rider came up the trail from Two Forks, and it was one of Semple's men, and he reined in and touched his hat and would not quite meet John's eye. You're Mercer driving to Two Forks? I am. Turn him around. John's hand tightened on the reins. Say that again. Mr. Semple sends his regrets. He won't be buying Mercer cattle. The man looked genuinely sorry, which somehow made it worse. Word came up from Larkspur. Mr. Semple does considerable business with the Larkspur Bank, his own papers held there. He was advised that the Mercer herd is encumbered. That the bank's got a lien might reach the cattle and any buyer'd be buying a lawsuit along with the beef. Mr. Semple can't take the risk. He's sorry. He said to say he's sorry. For a moment, nobody said anything. The herd milled. A day and a half of driving stood in the dust between them like a joke. That's a lie, Emily said. She'd ridden up quiet. There's no lien on those cattle. The note's on the land. The cattle are free and clear, and Halloran knows it. Ma'am, I only carry what I'm told to carry. Mr. Semple was advised. Advised men don't buy. That's all I know. He backed his horse. There's not a broker on this railhead'll touch that herd now, and I'd not waste 4 days finding it out the hard way. Halloran's got the whole line spooked. I'm sorry. And he was gone. John sat his horse in the middle of 80 head of cattle he could no longer sell, and something in his face went past anger into a cold, flat country beyond it. He reached ahead of us, John said. 100 miles ahead. He knew we'd run for a railhead, and he got there first with a whisper. He didn't even have to send a man. He stopped. He just told a banker to tell a broker, and the broker told his rider, and now 80 head of good beef aren't worth the grass they're standing on. And he never left his office. That's how he does it, Emily said low. That's exactly how he does it. He doesn't fight you. He makes it so there's nothing left to fight over. He turns the whole country into his hand and leaves you standing in it, holding nothing. She looked at the milling cattle. Turn them home, John. There's no sense driving beef we can't sell another mile. They turned the herd home. 4 days' hope gone in a sentence from a stranger, and the drive back was the longest ride of John Mercer's life, longer than the ride home from burying Martha, because on that ride at least he'd had nothing left to lose, and now he had everything to lose, and no way on God's earth to keep it. That night home with the boys down and the herd back in the near pasture, John Mercer made a decision, and it was the wrong one, and he made it the way good men make wrong decisions out of pride and out of not being able to bear one more person carrying his load. I'm going to town tomorrow, he told Emily, to see Halloran. To see him? For what? To ask him for time, man to man, off the paper. He said it to the stove, not to her. There's things a man'll say to another man across a desk that he won't put in a letter. Maybe he'll extend. Maybe there's a number that'll hold him off till the fall drives when I can sell honest. I have to try it. I can't sit here and let it come. He won't extend, Emily said. John, listen to me. I know this man. Going to his office to ask a favor is walking into the spider's front room and asking him to be merciful. He doesn't have the part that's merciful. It got cut out of him somewhere if it was ever in. He'll take your asking and he'll use it. He'll find out what you love by watching your face while you beg, and he'll press on it. Then I'll press back. With what you've got a crutch and a called note and 2 boys. He's got the whole valley in his pocket and a demand clause with your name on it. She came around the table and stood in front of him and made him look at her. Don't go alone. I'm not taking you into that man's office. Why not? Because, and here it came out of him rough, the thing he'd not said, the thing that had been building since the rider turned the herd around. Because he took everything you had. Once, Emily, and I'll not put you back across a desk from him to watch him do it to me. I'll not. A man's got to have one thing he won't do, and that's mine. I'll go alone. It's my note and my land and my name on the paper, and I'll go alone. And Emily Carter looked at him, and she understood then that his pride was going to cost him, and that there was no talking a proud man out of the one dignity he had left. And she let him go, because that too is a kind of love, knowing when a person has to walk into a fire and letting them, and getting the water ready for when they come out. Then go, she said. But John, whatever he offers you, whatever it is, you tell him no, and you come home, and we talk about it before you sign one thing. Promise me that. You don't sign in that office. You bring it home. There won't be anything to sign. He'll say no, and I'll come home. Promise me anyway. I promise, John said, and meant it, and had no idea yet what it was he'd promised, because he did not yet know that Cyrus Halloran was not going to say no. Cyrus Halloran was going to say something far worse. The bank in Larkspur smelled of ink and money, and the particular quiet that money keeps. And Cyrus Halloran did not stand when John Mercer came in on his crutch, and did not offer him a chair, and let him stand there a good half-minute, working his hat, while he finished a line in a ledger, because that half-minute was the first thing Halloran meant to take from him, and he took it. Mercer. Halloran sat down his pen at last. He was a soft, heavy pink man, with small, clean hands, and a voice like oil poured slow. I heard your drive turned back. 2 forks, was it? A long way to go to learn a thing you could have learned by asking. How's the leg? Mending. Good, good. A man wants 2 legs under him at a time like this. Halloran folded the small, clean hands on the ledger. You've come to ask me for time. I've come to talk to you like a man. Extend the note to the fall drives. I'll sell honest in October and pay you in full principal and interest, and you'll have lost nothing but a few weeks. That's a fair thing to ask, and you know it's fair. It is fair. Halloran agreed, pleasant. It's the kind of fare a man asks for when he's got nothing else. And ordinarily, Mercer, I might even grant it because a foreclosure's a bother, and the auction and the paperwork, it's all a bother, and I'm a man who dislikes bother. He leaned back. But you've made it interesting. And I find in my old age that I'll pay a little extra for interesting. I don't follow you. You've got a woman out at your place. Halloran said it lightly, watching John's face the exact way Emily had said he would, the way a man watches a card he's about to turn. A housekeeper. Carter, she calls herself now. Emily Carter. John went very still. I know that name, Halloran went on soft. I knew it before you did, I expect. Her husband held a note with me up north some years back. Tom Carter. A stubborn man. He came into this very kind of office and asked me for this very kind of time, and I'll tell you what I told him, which is what I'm going to tell you. He leaned forward, and the oil went out of his voice, and underneath it was something cold and level and patient. I don't lend money to keep men on land, Mercer. I lend money to get land off of men. The interest is a pleasantry. The land is the point. I have been buying this valley one bad year at a time for 11 years, and I will own the whole of it before I die, and men like you and Tom Carter are simply the weather I do it through. You son of a... Sit down. You can't come across the desk on that leg, and we both know it." Halloran waited. John did not sit. There was no chair. That was the joke. "Now, here is the interesting part. Here is what I'll offer you, and I'll only offer it the once. That woman is a problem to me. She was a problem 4 years ago. She stood up at her husband's auction and made a speech. Did you know that? Told the whole crowd exactly what I was. It changed nothing, but I remember it. People who make speeches at auctions have a way of turning up in other men's kitchens, making other men brave. And a valley I've spent 11 years teaching to be afraid does not need a woman in it, teaching it to be otherwise." He picked the pen back up, turned it in his fingers. "So, send her off. Put her on the stage back the way she came and see she doesn't come back. Do that, and I'll extend your note to the Fall Drive's principal. Only interest forgiven. And you'll sell your cattle honest in October, and keep your land and your boys and your name. All of it. For the price of one housekeeper you hired 3 months ago and owe nothing to." The bank was very quiet. "You want me to run her off?" John said, "to save my land." "I want you to make a sound business decision," Halloran said. "You're a widower with 2 sons and 4 generations of family in that dirt. She's a hired woman with a trunk. There's no arithmetic in the world where you choose the trunk. Send her away, keep everything, and in a year you'll have forgotten her name, or hire another one if you miss the cooking. They're not hard to come by." He smiled small and clean. "I'm being generous, Mercer. I'm handing you your whole life back and asking you to give up nothing you can't replace. Most men would already be thanking me." And John Mercer stood in the bank on his ash crutch and looked at Cyrus Halloran, and he understood all at once and all the way down 3 things. He understood that the man across the desk had done this exact thing before to Emily, to her husband. That this smooth, cruel offer was the same shape as the one that had ended with a man walking out to a barn and not coming back. He understood that Halloran genuinely believed there was no arithmetic in which a man chose the woman over the land. That in Halloran's whole long life of buying men out, he had never once met a man who wouldn't sell the person for the property, and that this belief was the engine of everything he'd built. And he understood standing there that he was about to disappoint Cyrus Halloran for the first time in 11 years. "No," John said. Halloran's pen stopped. "I don't think you heard the whole of the offer." "I heard it. Interest forgiven note, extended land, saved all of it for the price of running off the woman who set my leg and gave my boy back his voice, and grew beans in my dead wife's garden, and stood in your mercantile, and paid your marked-up bill in silver so my sons could eat." John's voice never rose. He'd learned that much from her that summer, without knowing he was learning it. "No, I heard it fine. And I'll tell you what I told nobody yet, Halloran, because you've earned the hearing of it. That woman is not a housekeeper I can replace. That woman is the best thing that has walked onto Mercer land in 10 years, and I have been too proud and too broke and too full of my dead wife to say it to her face, and I'm ashamed of that, and I'll fix it. But I will lose every acre and every board and stand in the road with my 2 boys and nothing before I hand you one more human being to grind up. You've had your last one out of me. Tom Carter's the last one you get." Halloran looked at him for a long moment, and something moved behind the pink, soft face, and it was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was a kind of pleasure. "Well," he said softly, "isn't that fine? Isn't that just fine?" He set the pen down. "Do you know, Mercer, in 11 years I have never once had a man say no to that offer? Not one. You're the first." He smiled. "It won't save you. You understand that the auction goes forward, the last day of August. You've bought yourself nothing but the pleasure of being noble in my office, and noble doesn't pay a note. In 3 weeks you'll be in the road with your 2 boys and your housekeeper and your nobility, and I'll own your land, and I'll have enjoyed it more than I've enjoyed anything in years, because a man who says no is so much sweeter to break than a man who says yes." He picked the pen back up and bent to the ledger. "Give the Carter widow my regards. Tell her the offer I made her husband and the offer I made you were the same offer, and that both of you were fools and that I win regardless. Good day, Mercer. Mind that leg on the stairs." John Mercer walked out of the bank on his crutch, and the walk down those stairs was the hardest walk of his summer. Harder than the herd turning back. Harder than the roof, because he had just chosen a woman over 4 generations of family in the dirt, and he had meant it, and it had saved nothing. And there is no lonelier feeling in the world than doing the right thing and watching it cost you everything anyway. He drove home slow. And here is the thing about John Mercer. The thing that was still wrong in him, even after the rightness in the bank, he came home, and he did not tell her. Not the offer, not the no. He couldn't. Because to tell her the offer was to tell her he'd been offered his whole life to send her away, and to tell her the no was to say out loud the thing he'd said to Halloran, that she was the best thing that had walked onto his land in 10 years, and John Mercer was not yet man enough to say that to her face. He'd say it to a spider across a desk before he'd say it to her across a table. So he came home with his ruin in his pocket and his love in his mouth, and he sat down to supper and said the auction was going forward, and nothing else. And Emily watched him, and knew there was more, and did not push, and the not pushing was its own long ache. That night he could not sleep, and he came down for water past midnight, the way he had the first night a whole summer ago. And the kitchen lamp was still burning, turned low. And Emily Carter was sitting at his table, in the 4th chair, not working, just sitting, hands folded the same as that first night, except that it was not the same at all, because a whole summer stood between the 2 nights, and he knew now what he had only felt then. "You waited up," John said. "I didn't wait up." She turned her head and looked at him. "I don't wait, John. I told you that the first night, though you were too busy being angry to hear it. I wasn't waiting for you then, and I'm not waiting for you now." She turned back to the dark window. "I just didn't leave." And there it was. The thing he had not seen all summer laid on the table between them, plain as the lamp. I just didn't leave. Because that was the whole of it, wasn't it? That was the whole difference between them. Every soul who'd come to that house since Martha died had treated themselves as temporary, had come in already, leaving already halfway out the door, already counting down like Noah on the frame. And he had treated them that way too, and worse, he had treated her that way, had hired her and housed her and eaten her food, and let her save his leg and his boy and his beans. And the whole time, the whole summer, in the deep unspoken country of himself, he had gone on treating her as the thing that would leave, because everything left that was the rule of the house. People don't stay, and she had never once acted like she was temporary. He had. She hadn't. He was the one who'd been treating her like a stranger passing through. And she'd been living in his house like a woman who'd already decided it was home, and had only been waiting. No, not waiting. She didn't wait, had only been there present day after day, for him to catch up to a thing she'd known since she unpacked her trunk. "Emily," John said, and his voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it steady. "I went to Halloran today." "I know you did. He made me an offer." She went still. "What kind of offer?" And John Mercer, who had said no to a spider, but could not say the truth to a woman, found that the 2 midnight kitchens, the first and this one, had finally made him into a man who could. "He offered me the whole of it. Note, extended interest forgiven land saved my boys, kept all of it. Every acre." He made himself hold her eyes. "For the price of putting you on the stage and seeing you never came back. He wanted you gone, Emily. That was the whole price. You." The lamp hissed. Emily's hands had gone white where they were folded. "And what did you tell him?" She said very low. "I told him no. John, I told him no before I'd half thought it, and then I thought it, and it was still no." He came further into the room, crutch and all, and he stood over the table where she sat in the 4th chair, and for the first time all summer, he did not hold one single thing back. "He told me there was no arithmetic where a man chose the woman over the land. He's a smart man, Halloran, and he's ruined 100 men, and he's never once been wrong about that, and I made him wrong today, and I'd make him wrong again tomorrow, and I'll lose this place doing it, and I don't care." His voice broke, and he let it. I have spent a year, Emily, telling everybody who came through that door that they were temporary. Telling my own self you were temporary, keeping a wall up so high that my boy stopped talking, and I didn't even. And you walked in, and you never once let me make you temporary. You just stayed. You just didn't leave. And I was too much of a coward to say to your face what I said to that spider's face across a desk. So I'll say it now, and God help me. It's late. It's a summer late. John, you are not a housekeeper. You have not been a housekeeper since the first night I found you in that chair, and it made me want to say something cruel, because I already knew I knew, and I couldn't stand knowing. I don't want you to leave. Not for the land. Not for anything. If I lose every acre I own, I want to lose it standing next to you. And if that's the wrong arithmetic, then I'm done with arithmetic, because I did the sums Halloran's way, and they came out to a man alone on saved land. And I have been that man, and I would rather be a man with nothing, and you than a man with everything and that empty chair. The kitchen was dead silent. Emily Carter sat in the fourth chair with her white-knuckled hands folded on the table, and she looked up at him, and her eyes were wet, which he had never seen, not once, not through the leg or the town, or the reveal of her whole ruined past. And she said in a voice that shook for the first time all summer, "You're late, John Mercer." "I know it." "Oh, you're a whole summer late." A tear went down, and she let it the way he'd let his voice break. "I decided about you in July, when you carried in that wood without being asked and let me pretend it was about the wood. I've been sitting in this chair every night since, not waiting. I told you, I don't wait, but sitting here where you'd find me, in case the night ever came, you were ready to catch up." She pressed her hand flat to her mouth a moment, then took it away. "And you picked the one night to catch up, that's 3 weeks before we lose the roof over the chair. I'll build you another roof. I know you will." And she almost laughed, and it came out half a sob. "That's the trouble with you. I know you will." They didn't touch. They were not those kind of people, not yet. Not with the leg and the boys asleep upstairs, and the whole ruin still standing over them. But John Mercer lowered himself into his own chair beside her, the two of them at the table in the low lamp, and for a long while neither one said anything. And the not saying was not the old not saying, the drowning kind. It was the other kind. It was the kind where two people have finally stopped being temporary to each other, and are simply sitting in it together in a house they have 3 weeks left to lose. "He said we're both fools," John said at last. "Halloran. He said the offer he made me was the same one he made Tom, and we were both fools, and he wins regardless." Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand, and when she took the hand away, the shake was gone out of her, and the flat forward set was back, and John understood that whatever had just happened between them in the fourth chair, the woman who had faced down a whole town without dropping her chin, had just come back into the room. "He made Tom the same offer," she said slowly. "The same offer. Send off who, John? Tom didn't have a housekeeper. What did Halloran ask Tom to give up to save his land?" John hadn't thought of it. He thought of it now, and the thinking of it put a cold hand on his neck. "He didn't say," John said. "He just said the same offer. Send her off, both fools. Send her off." Emily's voice had gone quiet and strange. "John, 4 years I have gone over every word that man said to my husband in that office, because Tom came home that day, changed, like you came home changed, and he wouldn't tell me what was said. And 3 months later he—" She stopped. Her hands had gone flat on the table. "He wouldn't tell me, just like you wouldn't tell me tonight till I dragged it out of you. Halloran asked Tom to send someone off to save the land, and Tom said no, and it broke him. And I never knew what it was in 4 years. I never knew, because the someone Halloran wanted Tom to send off." She looked up at John, and her face had gone white as paper, and the last piece of a thing 4 years buried came up out of the ground in the lamplight and stood between them, terrible and plain. "Was me," she whispered. "It was me. Halloran made Tom choose too. And Tom chose me and lost the land, and couldn't live with what it cost, and I never knew. For 4 years I have believed my husband walked out to that barn because he failed, because he lost the ranch, and he didn't. He walked out there because he saved me, and it ruined him, and he could never tell me, because how does a man tell his wife he had the chance to keep everything, and gave it up for her, and it wasn't enough. Her voice cracked wide open. He chose me, John, the same as you just did. And I have spent 4 years thinking he broke because he was weak, and he broke because he loved me, and that's so much worse, that's so much worse. And Emily Carter, who had not wept through any of it, who had buried her whole life, and set a stranger's leg, and faced a town, and never once dropped her chin. Emily Carter put her face down in her folded hands at John Mercer's kitchen table, and wept for a dead man she had misunderstood for 4 years. And John Mercer on his broke leg, in the low lamplight, 3 weeks from losing everything, put his hand on the back of her bent head, the first time he had touched her all summer, and let her. He was a good man then, John said very quiet into the dark above her shaking shoulders. Tom Carter, he was a good man. He was a good man. She wept. And I never knew it all the way, and now I do, and it's 4 years too late to tell him. Then tell me, John said. Whatever you'd have told him. Tell me. I'm not going where he went, Emily. I'm not going to save you and then walk out to a barn. I'm going to save you and stand here in the wreck of it and marry you in the road if that's where we end up. So whatever you never got to say to a good man who chose you, you tell me. I'll hold it for both of us. And the lamp burned low and the boys slept, and somewhere in Larkspur a fat man in a clean coat slept the sound sleep of a man who had never once been wrong about arithmetic, and did not yet know that 2 people at a kitchen table 12 miles off had just become the thing he could not buy, could not whisper away, could not lean or foreclose, or turn back on a trail. A family made, not by contract or blood, but by 2 souls who had each now chosen the person over the land, and lived, and were still sitting in it, together with 3 weeks left, and nothing to lose but each other, which was the one thing Cyrus Halloran had never in 11 years learned how to take. She told him that night. Everything she'd have said to Tom and John Mercer held it the way he'd promised, and by the time the lamp guttered out, they were not 2 people who had lost things separately anymore. They were 2 people who had lost things together, and had decided without any word grand enough to say it to stop losing. In the morning they told the boys. John did it at the breakfast table because Emily said a thing that big couldn't come at a boy sideways. It had to come straight across a table with food on it, so his hands had somewhere to go. So John set down his fork and said it plain. Boys, there's a man in Larkspur means to take this ranch, the bank. We owe money on the land, and the man that holds the papers calling it all due at once, and we've got 3 weeks to find it, or the place goes to auction and we lose it. House, barn, all of it. He made himself hold their eyes. I'd not lie to you. It's bad. It's about as bad as it gets. Noah's Fork had stopped. The Buggy Man, in July. That's the one. I knew it was bad. Noah's voice was tight. You had your bad face. The one from after Ma. He looked from his father to Emily and back. Are we going to lose it? We're going to fight it, Emily said. Every way there is. And I'll not promise you we win Noah because I promised you once I'd tell you the truth, and the truth is we might not. But I'll promise you this. You won't lose this without every soul at this table having stood up on their hind legs and made that man take it out of our hands 1 finger at a time. There's a difference between losing a thing and having it stole quiet. We're going to make him do it loud in front of the whole valley in the daylight so everybody sees exactly what he is. She looked at the boy. And whatever happens after win or lose, the 4 of us stay together. That part's not up for auction, you hear me? Wherever we land the 4 of us. And there it was. The 4 of us said out loud at last, at a breakfast table over eggs, by a woman who had been hired to cook them, and nobody at the table corrected the number. And Eli, who had spoken so little all summer, that every word was still an event, said the second bravest thing anybody said that whole month. Even if it's a wagon, Eli said. Even if we live in a wagon, the 4 of us. Even if it's a wagon, John said, and had to look at the wall. Then I don't care about the house, Eli said, and went back to his eggs, and it was the plainest theology anybody preached in Larkspur that year, that a house was boards and a family was people, and an 8-year-old had already worked out which one you couldn't replace. They counted the money that night. It was not enough. It was so far from enough that John laughed once short and ugly when Emily laid it all out on the table, the ranch's thin savings, the coins from the egg and butter money, old Dvorak's folded bills that she confessed to, now all of it stacked up small and brave against a number that dwarfed it. "We're a third of the way," Emily said. "Maybe. If we sell what we can sell local and quick and get robbed on the price doing it, we might reach half. Half doesn't save a ranch. Half's just a nicer word for lost. Half's a start. Half means we're not begging for the whole. Half means when we go to the valley we go asking them to close a gap, not carry a mountain." She squared the little stacks. "And we are going to the valley, John." "No." "John, no." He put his hand flat on the table. "I'll not do it. I'll not ride door to door in this county asking men who've got their own notes with that same bank to stick their necks in the same noose for me. You know what he does. You've watched him do it. Any man that helps me Halloran marks. He'll call their paper next spring for spite, and there'll be another auction, and another family in the road, and it'll be my doing. I'd sooner lose the place clean than save it by handing him the next 3 families to eat." His jaw was set hard. "That's not pride, Emily. Whatever you're about to say. That's just the arithmetic of what that man is." And Emily Carter looked at him a long moment, and when she spoke it was quiet, and it went in deeper than any argument. "You're doing his arithmetic again," she said. John went still. "That's twice now. In the bank, he told you there's no sum where a man picks the person over the land, and you proved him wrong, and I watched it cost you, and I loved you for it. And now you're sitting at this table telling me there's no sum where a valley picks each other over their own safety. And John, that's the same lie. That's his lie. That's the whole lie he's built his kingdom on, that everybody in the end does his arithmetic, that fear beats loyalty every time, that a man will always sell the neighbor to save the farm." She leaned in. "He's been right about it for 11 years, because nobody's ever made the valley add it up together. One family alone can't beat him. You're right about that. But he's never once had to fight the whole valley at the same time, because he's never once let them see they had the same enemy. He picks them off one at a time in the quiet, one bad year at a time, and every family thinks it's just their bad luck, and nobody ever stands in a crowd and realizes every other face in it has been bled by the same spider." Her voice dropped. "So we don't go to the valley to beg John. We go to the valley to introduce it to itself." The lamp hissed. "They'll say no," John said, but it had gone weaker. "Some will. Fear's real, and I'll never blame a man for it. But some will say yes, and the yeses will see each other saying yes, and that's the thing Halloran's never let happen." She started stacking the coins into a sack. "You rode drag on a broke leg for 4 days behind cattle you couldn't sell. Don't tell me now you haven't got one more hard ride in you, because this is the one that matters." So they rode the valley. They rode it for a week and a half, John and Emily, and sometimes Noah, from door to door in the summer dust, and it went exactly as she'd said it would. Which is to say, it went both ways at once. The first door was the widow Ackley, who Halloran had bled 2 years back, and she heard them out on her porch, and then went inside without a word, and came back with a coffee tin, and pressed the whole of it into Emily's hands, coins and small bills. Everything, and said, "He took my bills South 40 for a note. We'd have paid if he'd waited 1 season. You put that toward it. And you tell the rest of them Alma Ackley's in. Use my name. I'm not afraid of him anymore. There's nothing left of me for him to scare." That was the first door. The third door slammed. A man named Pruitt, father to the boy Noah had whipped, heard them out and went gray in the face and said, "Get off my land. I got 4 children, and a note comes due in the spring, and I'll not have that buggy turning up my road because I gave $2 to the Mercers. Get off, and God forgive me, but get off." And they got off, and Emily said not one hard word about it, all the way down the road, and finally John said, "You're not angry at him." And Emily said, "Angry at Pruitt? Pruitt's just Halloran's arithmetic wearing a scared man's face. I'm angry at the man who taught a father to be more afraid of a banker than ashamed in front of his own children. That's a different anger, and I'll keep it for who's earned it." and they rode to the next door. And the yeses mounted. Not many were rich. Most gave the way working people give in coffee tins and butter money, and a steer they'd meant to keep. At the Reyes place on the creek, John hung back at the gate, because half the valley wouldn't cross that threshold, and John was ashamed to realize a part of him had caught the habit without ever choosing it. It was Emily who walked straight up and knocked. Manuel Reyes came to the door with his hat already in his hand, wary a man used to being asked for things and blamed for others. "Senora Carter?" He'd heard her name. The valley was small. "You've come a long way to a house most of your neighbors won't sit in." "I've come to the house that shares a fence line with a man about to be robbed," Emily said. "And I'll sit in it gladly and drink your coffee if it's offered, and I'll tell you plain why I'm here, because you've earned plain talk more than most and gotten it less." And she told him. And Manuel Reyes listened, and his wife came and stood in the doorway behind him and listened. And when Emily was done, Manuel was quiet a while. "Halloran's Bank," he said at last, "would not lend my father $1 in 30 years, not one. We built this with no note because they'd give us none." A thin, hard smile. "So I have the one thing in this valley Cyrus Halloran cannot take. I owe him nothing." He turned to his wife, and something passed between them, and she nodded before he'd said a word. "We'll give more than we can spare. And we ask one thing in return, Senora." "Name it." "That our name goes on the list with the rest, not at the bottom, with the rest. That when they read out who stood for the Mercers, the Reyes name is read in the same breath as the Ackleys and the Dvoraks, and no man crosses it off." His voice did not rise. "We have money enough for many things. We have never once had that." "Manuel Reyes," Emily said. "I will read your name myself if I have to, and I'll read it first." And she took his gift and shook his hand, and John Mercer at the gate took his own hat off, and held it ashamed of the gate, and swore he'd not stand at another man's gate as long as he lived. Not every door opened. A rancher named Teague heard them out and looked at his boots and said his wife wouldn't stand for the risk which everyone in the county knew meant Teague wouldn't, and shut the door soft, which was somehow worse than a slam. And a storekeeper in town, a decent enough man, walked them out to the alley so his customers wouldn't see him talking to them, and pressed $2 into John's hand in the shadow between buildings, and begged them not to say where it came from, and Emily took it and thanked him, and walking away said low to John, "There's a whole kind of brave that only works in the dark. It's still brave, it's just sad it has to hide." And John didn't answer because his throat wouldn't let him. By the end of 10 days, there was a sack heavier than John Mercer had dared hope, and a list of names, and something moving in the valley that had not moved in 11 years, and it just might have been enough. Which is exactly when Halloran hit them. He didn't send a buggy this time. He didn't need to. He did it the way he did everything in the quiet with a whisper. But the whisper this time went to every family on Emily's list, and the whisper was very simple and very cold. It was passed by Deems the clerk, and by Mrs. Cobb at the mercantile, and by the 2 or 3 men in the valley who did Halloran's listening for him, and it said only this: "The bank has noted with interest which families are lending aid to the Mercer foreclosure. The bank holds paper on most of them. The bank has a long memory and a great many demand clauses. A prudent man reconsiders his charity. It worked the way it always worked. They came to take it back." That was the part that near broke John Mercer. Not the giving that stopped, but the taking back. Over 3 days, one by one, they came up the Mercer Road with their hats in their hands. Good men, ashamed men, and they stood in his yard and could not look at him, and said the same thing in different words. "Mercer, I got to think of my own. You understand. If it was just me, but I got the children." And they held out their hands for the coffee tins back. And John Mercer, who understood who could not even hate them for it, because he'd have done the same for his own boys, gave every one of them their money back with his own hands and said, "I understand. Go home to your children. There's no shame in it." And watch the sack grow light again, and the list grow short until there was almost nothing left of the thing that had almost been enough. Noah watched one of them do it. A man named Hollis, who'd given $3 whole a week before, near weeping his relief, when John handed it back, and Noah stood on the porch with his fists tight, and watched Hollis's wagon go back down the road, and when it was gone, the boy said low and shaking, "He's a coward." "No," John said. "Sit down here a minute." And Noah sat, and John sat beside him on the step. And for once, John Mercer found the words, because a summer with Emily had left some in him that hadn't been there in June. "That man's got 4 young ones, and a note in the spring same as us. He gave us $3 when he was scared, and he only took it back when he got more scared. And being scared for your children isn't cowardice, Noah. It's the most natural thing God put in a man. What Halloran does his whole trade is he takes that one good thing in a man, the fear for his own babies, and he turns it into a leash. He doesn't make cowards. He takes good scared fathers and uses the best part of them against their neighbors. That's the sin, not Hollis, Halloran. You keep those two straight in your head your whole life, and you'll not go far wrong." Noah was quiet a long time. Then he said, "Emily says the same. Different words, but the same." And John said, "Then it's likely true, if the both of us landed on it." And the boy leaned into his father's side on the step, 11 years old, and let to be 11, and they watched the empty road together. Almost nobody held. Ackley held. "There's nothing left of me to scare," she'd said, and she meant it. The Reyeses held because Halloran didn't hold their paper they'd never been allowed to borrow from his bank in the first place, which was its own bitter joke that the family the valley shunned was the only one he had no leash on. And old Dvorak held and stood in John's yard the day the others were taking their money back, and spat in the dust and said, "Cowards, the whole gutless lot. Halloran whistles and they come to heel." But even Dvorak, hard as he was when he'd said it, looked at the ground and added low, "Though I got a note too, John, come spring, and I got boys." And John said, "Then take yours back too. Klaus, I mean it, take it back." And old Dvorak said, "No." And that was all, and it was the bravest word said in that yard that summer, that one flat no, from a hard old man with a note coming due and boys to feed. But 3 families and a coffee tin don't beat a bank. The night before the auction, the 4 of them sat at the supper table, and nobody ate much, and the sack of money on the sideboard was maybe a fifth of the note, now a brave, useless fifth, and John Mercer looked at his family and prepared himself to lose. "We'll go tomorrow," he said, "to the auction, all of us, and we'll stand there while it happens, because Emily's right, a thing shouldn't be stole quiet. It should be took in the daylight where everybody sees. And then," his voice held barely, "then we'll load the wagon, and we'll go the 4 of us. Wherever there's work for a man who's good with cattle, and a woman who can do anything, and we'll build it again. It won't be this, but it'll be ours, and it'll be the 4 of us, and that's more than I had in June." He looked at Emily. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep it. I wanted to keep it for you, and the boys. I wanted—" "Stop," Emily said gently. "You're grieving it before it's gone. Don't. There's still a morning between us and losing it, and I've never yet met the morning that couldn't surprise me." But there was a thing in her face, something held back, something she'd been turning over, and John knew her well enough by now to see it. "You've got a card you haven't played," he said. "You've had it a while. I can see you holding it." Emily was quiet a moment. Then she got up and went into her little room off the kitchen and came back with a folded paper worn at the creases like it had been carried and reread, and she set it on the table. "3 weeks ago," she said, "the night you came home from the bank and told me the offer after you went to sleep, I sat up and I wrote a letter. And the next morning I sent it on the stage north to a man named Ordway, Silas Ordway. He's the territorial bank examiner for the Northern District. His office looked into Halloran once, years back, after my Tom, after a few others. There was talk, there was even an inquiry started. But it died because nobody would testify, because everybody was too afraid. And Halloran moved his charter south to this district where Ordway had no reach, and started over, and here we are." She tapped the paper. "But I kept Tom's papers. All of them. The note, the demand, call the letters. 4 years I've hauled that box of papers from rented room to rented room, and never known why I couldn't burn it. Now I know why. I sent Ordway copies of the whole of it, and I laid it beside what's happening to you, the same demand clause, the same called note, The same offer to spare a man if he'd send off a woman. And I told him, it's the identical scheme, the identical man run twice in 2 districts on a pattern. And if he wanted to see it done live in the daylight with witnesses who this time might not be too afraid to talk, he could come to the Mercer auction on the last day of August in Larkspur and watch Cyrus Halloran do the very thing his office could never prove. John stared at the paper. And did he answer? No, Emily said. That's the card, John. I don't know if it worked. I sent a letter into the dark to a man I met once years ago at the worst hour of my life, who may have retired or died or thrown my letter in the fire. I've heard nothing. He may come. He may not. It may be the thing that turns it, or it may be one more woman's letter that nobody answered. She folded her hands. So that's the whole of my hand laid down. A sack of coffee tin money that's 1/5 of the note 3 families brave enough to stand, and a letter into the dark that may have reached nobody. That's what we walk in with tomorrow. I'd not have you go in thinking I had a rabbit in the hat. I don't. I've just got the truth sent to the one man alive whose job it is to care, and a prayer he opened the envelope. And John Mercer looked at the worn, folded paper his wife-to-be had carried through 4 years and 3 rented rooms, and could not bring herself to burn. And he understood that Emily Carter had been fighting Cyrus Halloran quietly in the dark, with the only weapon a ruined widow had the truth kept and carried and finally sent, since long before she'd ever set foot on his land. Then we go in with the truth, John said, and a prayer. It's more than I had this morning. Nobody slept much. The last day of August came hot and bright, and by mid-morning the courthouse steps in Larkspur were crowded, because a foreclosure auction is a kind of theater in a small county, and half the valley had come to watch the Mercers go under, some out of ghoulishness, some out of that same fear, come to see what happens to a man who says no, so they'd remember never to. Halloran was there, of course. He came late on purpose, and stood at the front in his clean coat, with Deems at his elbow, soft and pink and patient, a man who had done this a dozen times and had never once lost. The auctioneer, a county man named Fisk, read out the particulars in a flat voice. The Mercer place. So many acres, the improvements, the terms cash on the fall of the hammer. And John Mercer stood with his family at the edge of the crowd and held Emily's hand for the first time in the daylight in front of the whole county, and did not care who saw. We'll open the bidding, Fisk said. The bank holds a note of record. Mr. Halloran. The bank bids the note, Halloran said, pleasant loud enough to carry. He named the figure. It was the whole debt exactly, not $1 more, the bid of a man who expects no contest, who is simply going through the daylight motion of taking a thing already his. And I'll remind the assembly, he added, turning a little so the whole crowd got the benefit of it, that the bank has a long memory for who does business against its interests. A very long memory. He smiled out at them. Do I hear any other bid? And the courthouse steps went dead silent. This was the moment Halloran had bought and paid for the silence, the 11 years purchased silence of a whole valley, too afraid to open its mouth, and he stood in it and let it stretch, savoring it, because the silence was the real thing. He owned more than the land, more than the money. The silence was his kingdom. Going once, said Fisk. Nobody moved. Going twice. I bid. It came from the crowd, rough and old, and every head turned, and it was Klaus Dvorak, hat in his fist, stepping forward into the open with his jaw shaking and his eyes wet and furious, an old man with a note coming due and boys to feed, doing the one thing the whole valley knew would cost him. I bid the note and $1, Dvorak said, and his voice cracked and he shoved it out anyway. $1 over, Klaus Dvorak. Write it down, Fisk. Write my name down where everybody can see it. Halloran's pink face did not change, but something behind it did. Mr. Dvorak, consider carefully. The bank. I heard your long memory speech, Halloran. Dvorak spat in the dust. I'm 71 years old. You want to remember me, you go ahead and remember me. I bid the note and $1. The bank bids. Halloran named a figure higher. And here is where 11 years of arithmetic came apart, one voice at a time, because Alma Ackley stepped out next to Dvorak and said, And Alma Ackley bids over the bank whatever the old fool bid, and add my coffee tin to Klaus's. And then it was one of the Reyes brothers. Quiet, dignified, saying, "The Reyes family stands with Dvorak." And then, and this was the thing, this was the crack running through the ice, it was Pruitt. Pruitt who had thrown them off his land. Pruitt who had 4 children and a note in the spring. Pruitt pushed to the front of the crowd with his face the color of ash, and his voice shaking so hard he could barely make it, and said, "And an Amos Pruitt stands with them. God help me, God help my children, but I'll not go home and tell my boy. I stood in this crowd and watched and did nothing, when the Mercer boy at least had the sand to whip him fair. Amos Pruitt stands with Dvorak. Remember me too, Halloran. Remember the whole damn valley." And it went up like a grass fire, because that was the thing Halloran had never once allowed to happen. In 11 years, he had never let them see each other be brave. And now they had seen it. One man, then a woman, then a shunned family, then a coward turned brave in front of his neighbors, and the fear that had ruled the courthouse steps broke all at once, and turned into its opposite, and voice after voice came out of the crowd. "I stand with Dvorak. Count me in, Edmine. Write my name. Halloran. Write my name down big. Even Hollis." Hollis, who'd taken his $3 back and wept his relief doing it. Hollis shoved to the front with his wife white-faced beside him and shouted, "And Tom Hollis stands with him, and I'm ashamed it took me till today. And you can call my note come spring, Halloran. I'll stand in this very spot again, and I'll bring my neighbors." And Teague, who'd shut the door soft, came out of the crowd, not saying a word, just walked up and stood shoulder to shoulder with Dvorak, and his standing there said it. And the storekeeper, who'd only been brave in the dark, stepped out into the daylight at last. Blinking like a man come up from a cellar, and said his name out loud, where his customers could hear it, and did not die of it, and looked surprised to find he did not die of it. Noah had hold of his father's hand, gripping it white, and Eli had climbed up onto a hitching rail to see over the crowd. And when the storekeeper said his name in the daylight, Eli called out in his small, clear voice that had been silent a whole year and now would not be stopped. "Write ours too. Write the Mercers. We're standing for us." And the crowd laughed, the good laugh, the freed laugh, and somebody hollered back, "The Mercers is already wrote boy, biggest of all." And Eli grinned like the sun coming up, and John Mercer thought his chest would not hold what was in it, until it was not 3 families anymore, it was 30. It was most of the valley, a whole county, that had been bled. One quiet family at a time, suddenly standing together in the daylight, and discovering all at once that it had never been weak. It had only ever been alone. And it was not alone anymore. Halloran's voice cut through it, and for the first time all summer it had lost its oil. "This is absurd. None of you has the cash. A bid's no good without cash on the Hammerfisk. You know the rule. They've got mine." The new voice came from the back, and it belonged to a lean, hard-traveled man, nobody knew, who pushed through the crowd leading a second man behind him, and John Mercer's breath stopped because he knew the first man. It was Semple, the cattle broker from Two Forks, the one who'd turned the herd back with a whisper 3 weeks gone. "Semple," John said. "Mercer." Semple didn't quite meet his eye, and there was shame in him, plain the good kind, the kind that had ridden 100 miles to be got rid of. "I turned your cattle back on a coward's word. I've not slept right since. A man came through Two Forks a week ago asking questions about how Halloran does his business, official questions, territorial questions, and it put a mirror up to me. I didn't like the look of." He raised his voice so it carried. "So I'll say this in the daylight. I'll buy the Mercer herd, right now. 80 head top price cash on the courthouse steps, no lien, no bank, and I dare any man to tell me it's encumbered to my face." He pulled a fat bank draft from his coat. "That's cash enough to cover the note, and then some in John Mercer's own hand, so he can bid on his own land like a free man. Halloran doesn't get his silence today. Not from me, not from anybody." And the second man. The stranger Semple had brought through the crowd stepped up beside Fisk and drew out a leather folder and opened it unhurried, and did not raise his voice at all, and did not need to, because the whole valley had gone quiet again. But it was a different quiet now, a leaning forward quiet. "My name is Silas Ordway," the man said. "Territorial Bank Examiner, Northern District, and as of the 10th of this month, seconded to this one, at the request of the Territorial Governor's Office, to look into a pattern of foreclosures." He looked mild as milk at Cyrus Halloran, whose pink face had at long last gone the color of the paper he'd built his kingdom on. "I received a letter 3 weeks ago, from a widow. It contained a set of documents from a foreclosure in my old district. A demand clause, a called note, and a rather distinctive private offer made to the debtor. Spare your land, sir, if you'll only send a certain person away. I've spent the interval comparing those old papers to your recent activity in this valley, Mr. Halloran. And I'll tell you plainly in front of these good people, since you're so fond of long memories, I have a longer one. And I have subpoena power. And I have a great many questions about how a national bank charter comes to be used, twice now in 2 districts, to separate widowers from their land by way of demand calls that no honest bank in this territory would write." He closed the folder. "You may of course proceed with today's auction. I'd only advise you to bid very carefully, because every dollar you overbid the fair value of this land in front of me on this pattern I will read as evidence of exactly what I've been sent to find. So, by all means, Mr. Halloran." A thin smile. "Outbid the valley. I'd dearly love to watch you do it." And Cyrus Halloran stood on the courthouse steps in his clean coat in front of the whole county, with a cattle broker waving cash, and an examiner holding a leather folder, and 30 families roaring a dead widow's arithmetic back in his face. And for the first time in 11 years, the spider had nowhere left to be patient from. He could not overbid, not with Ordway watching, not without hanging himself. He could not lean on the crowd had stopped being afraid. He could not whisper, there was no quiet left to whisper into. He stood there and did the sums the way he'd made 100 men do the sums across his desk, and for the first time in his life, the sums came out against him, and there was no clause to call, and no clerk to send, and no fear to spend, only a leather folder, and a fat draft of honest cattle money, and 30 faces that had learned in one morning the one lesson he'd spent 11 years teaching them: never to learn that a man alone is easy, and a valley together is not. And that he had by his own patient hand, one demand call at a time, finally built the very thing he'd always feared, a crowd that had run out of reasons to be afraid of him. "The bank," Cyrus Halloran said, and the words came out of him like they were being pulled with a hook, "withdraws its bid." The courthouse steps erupted. "Sold," said Fisk, and he was grinning now, the flat county man grinning like a boy, to John Mercer, who'll be paying the note in full out of an honest cattle sale with the valley as his witness. Sold, and be damned to long memories. And John Mercer stood on the courthouse steps with his sons shouting, and his neighbor's hands pounding his back, and old Dvorak weeping openly and unashamed, and Amos Pruitt laughing like a man let out of jail. And he turned through all of it, and found Emily Carter, who was standing very still in the middle of the roaring crowd, with the worn folded letter still in her hand. 4 years and 3 rented rooms of carrying it a letter into the dark that had reached somebody after all. And she was not looking at the crowd, and she was not looking at Halloran, going gray and small and turning away. She was looking up past all of it at the hot bright sky, and her lips were moving. And John Mercer did not have to hear the words to know she was talking to Tom, telling a good man who'd chosen her, and lost that. His choice had finally 4 years late in another valley, saved somebody after all that the papers he'd made her keep had done what he never lived to see them do, and that she'd loved him right in the end, even if it took her 4 years to understand the size of what he'd done. John didn't interrupt her. A man knows when a woman is finishing something with the dead. He just took the boy's hands and stood with them at the edge of the crowd, and waited in the daylight on saved ground for her to be done. And when she lowered her eyes from the sky at last, and found the 3 of them there, waiting the whole rest of her life, standing in a row, holding hands, watching her come back from the dead man she'd finally made peace with. Emily Carter walked across the courthouse steps through a valley that would never again be afraid of Cyrus Halloran. And she put her hand in John Mercer's, and the two of them and the two boys walked down the steps and out into the street, 4 across in the full light of the last day of August, and did not once look back at the pink, small, ruined man they left standing on the steps behind them. The ride home from Larkspur should have been the happiest 4 miles of John Mercer's life, and for the first 2 of them, it was the boys hollering the wagon, rattling Emily, laughing at something Eli said, a whole valley of hands still warm on his back. But somewhere in the 3rd mile, John went quiet, and Emily, who read him, now the way she'd once read the house, felt the quiet come. "There it is," she said. "You held it clear through a foreclosure. What's brought it on now when we've won?" "Nothing." "John." "It's the shawl," he said before he'd decided to. "Martha's shawl, on the peg by the door. It's been there since March, a year gone, and it's got her dust on it, and I couldn't move it, and you're coming home to a house with my dead wife's shawl on the peg, Emily. And I don't know how to have both those things true at once." "You. And the shawl. I don't know how a house holds the both of you." Emily was quiet a while. "A house holds the both of us the same way a heart does," she said finally. "By not making it a contest. I'm not coming into that house to erase Martha Mercer John. Lord, the woman raised those 2 boys into people worth the saving. I'd not take her peg. I'd not want it." She looked out at the road. "You know what I'd do with that shawl if it were mine to say I'd take it down careful, and I'd fold it, and I'd give it to Noah and Eli to keep in a cedar box, because it's theirs. Not the walls their mother's to have and to hold and to take out. When they miss her, not to hang there, gathering dust where nobody can touch it or move past it. A thing on a peg is a wound. A thing in a boy's own box is a keepsake. That's the whole difference." She turned to him. "But it's not mine to do. That one's yours, John. Or better, it's theirs." And that night John Mercer stood in his own hall in front of a shawl he had not been able to touch in 18 months, and he could still not quite touch it, and it was Eli Small. Eli, so lately given back his voice, who came and stood beside him and looked up and said, "Can I hold it? You want to hold your ma's shawl." "I don't remember her face right no more," Eli said, plain as an 8-year-old says the most enormous things. "But the shawl still smells a little like her. I want to keep it where I can get it, not up there where I can't reach." And John Mercer took down Martha's shawl at last, because his boy asked, and he did not come apart, doing it the way he'd feared for a year and a half. He would. He folded it clumsy, and Emily's hands came and folded it right, and he put it in Eli's arms, and Eli held it to his face and breathed his mother in, and Noah came and put his hand on the wool too, and the 2 boys carried their mother off to keep her in a box they could open whenever they pleased, and the peg by the door stood empty, and it was not a wound any more. It was just a peg. "There," Emily said softly. "Now the house holds the both of us. Her in a box the boys can open, and me at the stove. Nobody erased. That's how it's done." John should have asked her that night. Everything was right for it. And he opened his mouth too. And then the thing that had always been wrong in John Mercer. The thing that made him say hard words to a woman in a chair, because he already loved her. The thing that made him say no to a spider, but couldn't say the truth across a table. That thing rose up in him one last time, and he lost his nerve, and he said instead, "You'll stay on then. Same terms. $6. And heard himself and stopped appalled. Emily's face changed. "Same terms," she repeated, flat. "That's not what $6 a month," she said. "Room and board. If it doesn't work, you leave. That's the terms you just offered me, John Mercer, standing in the hall where we just took down your dead wife's shawl together." She was not angry. Anger he could have argued with. She was worse than angry. She was quiet and hurt and let him see it. "I have run your ranch on a broke leg. I gave your boy back his voice. I carried a letter 4 years and sent it into the dark, and it saved your land. And you stand there and offer me $6 a month." She turned toward her little room. "I'll stay tonight. We'll talk terms in the morning, like the arrangement you seem determined to keep it." And she shut the door quiet the way she'd shut it the very first night a whole summer ago, and John Mercer stood alone in the hall with an empty peg and a closed door, and the certain knowledge that he had at the exact hour of his greatest happiness been the biggest fool in the territory. He didn't sleep. He deserved not to. The reckoning came in the morning, but it did not come from John because John was still working up his nerve at the barn, and while he worked it up, the twist that would test the whole of it came riding up the Mercer Road in the person of a stranger with a leather satchel. "I'm looking for a Mrs. Emily Carter." Emily came out drying her hands. "You've found her, ma'am." The man touched his hat. "I'm out of Silas Ordway's office. He sends this and asks I put it in your hand direct." He gave her a thick envelope. "And he asks I wait for your answer if you've one to give." Emily opened it at the table with the boys watching, and John come up from the barn standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands. She read it once. She read it twice. And her face, which had held steady through a called note and a broke leg and a whole cruel town, went very still. "What is it?" John said. "It's Ordway." Her voice was strange. "The inquiry. It's real, John. He's moving against Halloran in earnest. The charter, the whole of it, and it's going to stick this time because the valley'll testify. But that's not—" She set the letter down. "Part of what his office does when it proves a bank foreclosed wrongful is it makes restitution to the families that were robbed. And my Tom's foreclosure up north, Ordway's ruled it was wrongful, fraudulent. The demand call should never have been written." She looked up, and there was something breaking open behind her eyes. "They're offering it back, John, my old place, or its value in money enough to buy land clear anywhere my own name on the deed. 4 years I lost everything, and a man with a leather satchel just rode up your road and offered me my whole life back. Independent, free and clear, my own ranch. The thing Halloran took." The kitchen was dead quiet. And here was the true test, the one the whole summer had been building toward, without any of them knowing it, because now Emily Carter did not have to stay. Now she was not a widow with a trunk and nowhere to go. Now she was a woman with her own land on offer, and her name on a deed, a woman who could walk out that door and rebuild the exact life the world had stolen. Oh, nobody need, nobody be beholden to, no man ever again. Now, for the first time, staying would be a choice, and nothing but a choice. And John Mercer, God help him being the man he was, did the noble cowardly thing one last time. "You should take it," he said. Emily's head came up. "You should take it," he said again, and his voice was wrecked, and he made himself go on. "It's your own land, Emily. Your name. The thing that was stole from you. I'll not stand between a woman and getting her whole life back. I did that to nobody, and I'll not start with you. Take it. Go build your place. You'll not owe $6 a month to any man, least of all a fool who offered you terms in a hallway last night." He turned his hat in his hands. "I'll drive you to the stage myself, same as I offered in the spring. Only this time it's not Halloran sending you off. It's you getting back what's yours. And that's a thing I'd never take from you, not to keep you, not for anything." And Emily Carter looked at John Mercer for a long, long moment. Then she started to laugh, and it was half a sob, and she put her face in her hands, and when she took them away, she was shaking her head at him with her eyes streaming. "You will never learn," she said. "You will never ever learn. Twice now. Twice you've had the woman standing in front of you, and twice you've handed her the door, because you think that's what love looks like, getting out of the way. John Mercer, getting out of the way is the one thing I have never once needed from you." She stood. "Do you want to know what I heard just now when that man offered me my old land back? Do you want to know the first thought in my head before I'd read the second line?" She came around the table to him. "My first thought was, I'll have to tell John. Not I'm free, not I'm rich, not I'm going home. My first thought, the very first, was that I couldn't wait to bring the news in from the road and put it on the table and see what you'd make of it, because somewhere this summer, without asking my leave, this became the table I bring my news to. This one, with the 4 chairs. Her voice broke. "I don't want my old place back, John. I stood in the crowd and watched them auction that life away 4 years ago, and I have grieved it, and I am done grieving it. I want money out of Halloran. Yes, I'll take his money. and I'll be glad, and I'll put it toward this ranch, toward your note, toward these boys' futures, because that's where I want my life to be. It's already here. It's been here since July. The only person in this house who doesn't seem to know it is the one who keeps trying to drive me to the stage. Emily. So no, I will not take it and go. I'll take Halloran's money and I'll stay not because I've got nowhere else. I've got somewhere else now. I've got my own land on a silver platter. I'll stay because out of every acre in this whole territory, this is the one I choose. Do you understand the difference? 4 years ago, I stayed with Tom because I loved him and we built it together. Last spring, I stayed here because your boys needed me and I couldn't watch it happen again. But right now, this morning, with my own deed in reach right now, I stay for no reason on God's earth except that I want to. That I looked at everything the world could give me back, and I looked at you and those 2 boys and I picked you, freely, with my eyes open, nothing forcing my hand. She took his face in her 2 hands the first time, and made him look at her. That's the only kind of staying that was ever worth anything, John. The kind you don't have to do. Now, you've got exactly 1 chance to not be a fool. Use it. And John Mercer, who had said hard words to hide soft ones, who had offered terms in a hallway, who had twice tried to give away the best thing that ever walked onto his land, because he thought nobility meant standing aside, John Mercer. Finally, at the very last hour, with a woman's hands on his face and his whole life in the balance, said the true thing, plain with nothing held back and no arrangement in it, and no door left open for her to leave by. Marry me, he said. Not for the boys, not for the ranch, not for $6 or 6,000. Marry me because I have been a dead man walking since March a year ago, and you walked into my kitchen, and I have been slowly against every wall I built coming back to life all summer, and I don't want to do the rest of it without you. I love you, Emily Carter. I've loved you since the first night I found you in that chair, and it made me want to be cruel because I could feel it starting, and I was too scared of losing another one to let it. I'm not scared anymore. Or I am, and I'm doing it anyway, which the boys tell me is the only kind of brave there is. Marry me. Choose me the way you just said, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never once regret picking the poorer deed. The kitchen was silent. And then Eli Mercer, who had climbed up onto the 4th chair to watch, said in a loud, clear stage whisper to his brother, "Say yes, say yes, say yes." And the whole terrible tension of it broke into laughing, and Emily Carter laughing, and crying at once said, "Yes, you impossible man. Yes, I should have made you sweat longer, but yes." And John Mercer kissed her there in the kitchen in front of God and 2 boys and a man from Ordway's office who'd stopped pretending not to watch, and Noah let out a whoop, and Eli fell off the chair. And the news that would go around the whole valley by nightfall started right there at a table with 4 chairs. And it was this, that the widower Mercer, who a year ago couldn't light his own lamps, was going to be married, and that he'd asked her the morning after she'd been handed her freedom, so that everybody in the county who cared to reckon it would know she'd said yes as free as any woman ever said it. The boys took it in their own 2 ways, which were the 2 ways they took everything. Eli, once he'd climbed up off the floor, planted himself in front of Emily with a great and serious question. "Do I call you Ma now, or Emily, or Ma Emily?" He frowned, working it. "'Cause I already got a Ma, in the box, so it feels like there ought to be a different word, but I don't know the word. You call me whatever comes natural, honey," Emily said, kneeling to him. "Any day. And if some days it's Emily, and some days it's Ma, and some days you don't call me anything at all, that's all right too. There's no wrong word for it. Your first Ma's in the box, and she's in you, and she doesn't have to move over for me 1 inch. There's room, I've told you. There's always room. Ma Emily." Eli decided, trying it, and then nodded, satisfied like a boy who'd solved a sum. "For now, I'll tell you if I change it." Noah didn't ask what to call her. Noah had known what to call her since a night in July, and had just never let himself say it. He came up quiet the way he came up on everything, and he didn't hug her, wasn't ready for that in front of a stranger from Ordway's office. But he stuck out his hand, man to man, the way his father did, and said, You did what you said. You didn't leave." And Emily shook his hand grave as a treaty and said, "I told you leaving wasn't in the terms." And Noah almost smiled, and it was for that boy the same as falling off a chair with joy. The messenger from Ordway's office rode off with Emily's answer to the restitution that she'd take the money, not the land, and that they could send it to the Larkspur Bank, under new management by then, in the name of Mercer. And that was the last little knife slid into Cyrus Halloran, that the money he'd stolen from a widow 4 years gone would come back as the down payment on the very valley he'd tried to eat, because Halloran was finished. Ordway's inquiry did what 4 years and one dead man could not. It pulled the man's charter and opened his books, and the books told the whole 11-year story in his own patient hand. And by the time the frost came, the fat man in the clean coat was gone from Larkspur, gone south or east, or wherever such men go, to be small in a place that doesn't know them yet. And the notes he'd held on half the valley were bought up by a proper territorial bank at honest terms. And Dvorak's paper that came due in the spring came due to men who did not deal in fear. The valley kept its land, all of it. Every family that had stood on those courthouse steps kept its land, and they knew why, and they did not forget. And for the rest of their lives, the Reyes name got read in the same breath as any in the county because a woman had insisted on it once, and a whole valley had learned that morning what her insisting was worth. They married in September, when the worst of the heat had broken out in the yard between the house and the barn, because Emily said no church would hold the guest list, and she was right. The whole valley came. Dvorak came in a collar that near choked him and wept through the entire thing, and pretended it was dust. Alma Ackley came and stood up front like family because she was. The Reyes family came and were seated up front too at Emily's own word, and nobody said one thing about it, because the man who taught them to was gone. And Amos Pruitt came and brought his boy, and the Pruitt boy, and Noah Mercer, stood off by the corral before the ceremony, and had the gruff, kicking dirt conversation of two boys who'd whipped each other once and had somehow through their father's troubles come out the far side something like friends. "My pa cried at your pa's auction," the Pruitt boy said, kicking a clod, "standing up and everything, in front of people." "My pa cried when he took my ma's shawl off the peg," Noah said. So I guess our pa's both cry." "I guess they do." Noah considered it. "Emily says it don't make 'em weak. Says a man who can't cry is just a man who's scared of his own water." He shrugged. "She talks like that. You get used to it. She the one that whipped the whole town at the store. My ma won't shut up about it." "That's her," Noah said, and there was a thing in his voice, a plain, unhidden pride that a year ago Noah Mercer would have died before letting anyone hear. "That's my ma." And he heard himself say it, my ma, the words just coming out. Natural. No fight in them, and he did not take them back, and the Pruitt boy did not make anything of it. And that was the whole of Noah Mercer's healing, said to another boy by a corral fence without one grown person there to witness it, or make it into a moment. My ma. There were no speeches. Emily had forbidden speeches. There was a circuit preacher, and the wind and the dust, and the two boys standing up front where a mother's people stand, and there was John Mercer in his one good coat, holding the hands of a woman who had chosen him with her own land on offer. And when the preacher asked, did he take her, John Mercer, who had been so slow all his life to say the true thing, plain said, "I do," so fast and so loud that the whole yard laughed, because a man who's finally learned to say it can't hardly be stopped. But before the vows in the last quiet minute, while the preacher found his place, Emily Carter stood in the yard in her one good dress and looked up once more at the same wide sky she'd looked up at on the courthouse steps, and her lips moved just for a breath, and John, who was learning to read even her silences, now leaned close and said low, Tom, she said, "I told him I wasn't asking his leave because a dead man doesn't get a vote on the living. But I told him thank you for choosing me once when it cost him everything. And I told him I finally understood what it was worth, and that I was going to spend it well this time, not waste it on grief the way I near did, but spend it on these boys and this man and this saved ground." She wiped her eyes. "He'd have liked you, John. He'd have liked how slow you were. He was slow too. Good men often are. It's the bad ones that are quick." And then the preacher found his place, and she turned from the sky to the man in front of her, from the husband she'd buried to the one she was choosing. And she did not look up at the sky again, because she was done at last, all the way done, and there was nothing left up there she hadn't said. And afterward there was eating and a fiddle, and the whole valley danced in the dusk on saved ground, and old Dvorak, 3 cups of somebody's cider in him, danced a stiff old country reel with the widow Ackley, until the both of them had to sit down, laughing. And Manuel Reyes was pulled into the dancing by half the county that a year ago wouldn't sit at his table. And Amos Pruitt got up and gave a toast. Anyway, speeches be hanged, and it was 1 sentence long. To the family that made this valley remember, it had a spine. And everybody drank to it, and nobody argued the count of the family, which was 4 us. And when the fiddle finally slowed, Noah Mercer came and found Emily where she stood catching her breath, and he had something in him he'd been carrying all day, the way he carried things, and she saw it and waited. "I knew before he did," Noah said. "Knew what, honey? That you were staying, that it was gonna be this." He looked at the ground, then made himself look up, because he was learning from both of them to say the true thing to a person's face. "I knew the day Pa bought the extra chair." Emily went still. The extra chair. Ours was broke. The 4th one. It had been broke since Ma. Pa took it out to the barn 'cause he couldn't stand looking at where she sat. And then one day, right before you came, he went to town, and he came back with a new chair, a plain one, just a chair, and he set it at the table and never said one word about it, and I watched him do it. Noah's voice was steady now, the load off his back for good. "A man don't buy a 4th chair for a housekeeper, Emily. You put a housekeeper at the counter or you feed her after. He bought a chair for the table. He set a 4th place. And I remember thinking, he don't even know he did it. He thinks he bought a chair for a hired girl. But you don't buy a chair for the table for somebody you mean to send off in the fall." He almost smiled. "So I knew. Way back in June before you ever got here. I just didn't say 'cause I was still scared it'd break. But it didn't break. You didn't leave." He shrugged, 11 going on a man. "I stopped counting the days a while ago, but I never told you the last number. It was 39. 39 marks on the barn door before I rubbed 'em out. And then I quit counting 'cause you can't count how long forever's gonna be." Shum. And Emily Carter, who had faced a town and a bank and a broke leg without her chin dropping, put her arms around a boy who was not her blood, and never would be, and was from that day wholly and forever her son, and held him in the September dusk while the fiddle played, and did not try to say anything, because some things a person just holds. Later still, when the guests had gone, and the boys were finally impossibly asleep, and the yard was quiet, and the ranch was theirs, and the note was paid, and the spider was gone from the valley, John and Emily Mercer sat at the kitchen table in the low lamplight, the same table, the same lamp, the same 2 chairs pulled close, where a whole summer of midnights had happened, and for a long while neither of them said anything. And it was the good kind, the kind that had stopped being lonely back in July. Eli had left a drawing on the table. He was drawing again, had been for weeks now, since the auction, since his voice came all the way back. This one was done in his blunt child's pencil, and it showed 4 figures standing in a row in front of a house, holding hands, 4 across and off to the side. A horse with its neck done, careful, the way he'd always done a horse's neck, and under it in a boy's laborious print. 4 names, and the 4th chair at the table, which he'd drawn in too, standing off by itself, had a small 5th figure sitting in it that was smaller than the rest, and had wings, and beside it he'd printed M.A., so nobody would mistake it, because Eli Mercer had worked out in his own theology that you could carry your dead in a cedar box and draw them into the family picture both at once, and that a table with 4 living chairs could still have room in the drawing for the one who'd gone. John looked at it a long time. "He drew her back in," John said rough. "He drew her a chair," Emily said. "The right way. Not on a peg, not a wound. A chair in the picture with the rest of us, where the boys can look at her and not be scared." She touched the drawing. That's what I always wanted for this house, John, from the first night I sat in that chair and you wanted to say something cruel. Not to take Martha's place. Just to make a house where the living and the loved and lost could all have a seat and nobody had to hold their breath and nobody had to leave. She looked up at him. You know what he taught me, your little one? The whole thing. Trees survive the wind by bending. Houses survive grief by making room. And a family a real one. It isn't the people who share your blood or sign your papers. It's just whoever's still sitting at the table when the fires burn down and the guests are gone, and there's nothing left to gain by staying. She put her hand over his. It's whoever didn't leave. And John Mercer, who had hired a woman to cook and clean, and had gotten instead his whole life back. His boys' voices, his own heart. A valley taught to stand, a dead wife, honored and a living one. Chosen free. John Mercer looked around the quiet kitchen at the 4 chairs he'd never once been able to explain to himself why he kept setting, and he finally understood the thing his 11-year-old son had understood back in June. He had never bought that 4th chair for a housekeeper. He had bought it for her months before she came, before he knew her name, back when he still thought he was a dead man who'd never feel anything again. Some stubborn, unkilled part of him had gone to town and bought a chair for the table, a place at the family, and set it there, and waited without ever admitting he was waiting for someone worth the setting of it. And she had walked in off a dusty road and sat down in it, and never once acted like she was temporary. And that, in the end, was the whole of it. Not a contract, not blood, not $6 a month, not even love, the way the word gets used on wedding days, but something plainer and harder and truer than any of those, that a family is not a thing you are given or a thing you sign, but a thing that gets built. One kept plate, and one unslammed door, and one refused stage ticket at a time by whoever decides against all the leaving in the world to stay long enough to stop being temporary. And Emily Mercer, who had every reason and every means to go and chose the poorer, harder, truer deed, instead had stayed and would stay, and did not leave, and never from that September on, ever left again.